Everybody, welcome to the February 1st, 2021 special Troy City Council meeting. We will call this meeting to order and ask for the roll call. Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Baker.
Here.
Councilmember Abraham.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Brooks.
Here.
Councilmember Chamberlain Krenga.
Here.
Councilmember Erickson Galt.
Here.
Councilmember Hamilton.
Here.
Councilmember Hoderick.
Here.
All present this evening. First on the agenda of our special meeting is public comment. As a reminder, so long as we're meeting virtually like this, we can have public comment submitted either via voicemail to 248-524-3302 or via email to publiccomment@troymi.gov. And those messages need to be received by 4 p.m. the day of the meeting, and they must be limited to 3 minutes. So I'll turn it back over to City Clerk Dixon to see if we have any public comment for this evening.
Thank you, Mayor. We have one voicemail tonight.
Mr. Baker, Roger Walters. My son and I have decided that I am going to run for mayor of the city of Troy. If Ms. Brooks doesn't want to run for mayor of the city of Troy, I will. I have 3 good proposals for the city of Troy, which you should have implemented a long time ago. Thank you and have a nice day, and you'll hear more from me.
That's all the public comment tonight.
Right, that concludes those who have submitted public comment in advance of this evening's meeting. Thank Mr. Walters for calling in, as he has frequently over the past year. Appreciate his comments and his passion as always. Anyone else have any comments in response to public comment this evening? All right, well, we'll move on to the regular business stated in the special meeting notice. We have one agenda item this evening in regular business, and it's City Council Ethics Study Session. We've been, as the memo stated in the agenda packet, we've been waiting for this for quite a while, but for various reasons, it's been pushed back. Certainly, COVID has played a large role in that, as well as the Plant and Moran study investigative report, which was recently provided to us, or fairly recently. So we're excited to have this tonight. And I will turn it over to City Attorney Bloom to get things rolling. City Attorney Bloom, if you could at some point, and I'm sure you will during your presentation, let us know what it is, if anything, you and city management are looking for from us at the end of this meeting. That'll help us as we have our discussion and question period as we move to that section.
Okay, and for IT, I'm guessing that you're going to put this on the presentation mode. And Mayor, I would just indicate that the last 2 slides actually, what I'd like to do is read the last the information on the last 2 slides, because I have information for possible discussion, and then after that, I would like to turn it over to City Council. So it's a fairly short PowerPoint. It does accompany the 6-page memorandum and multiple pages of different ethics ordinances and different materials that I thought would be helpful for your consideration and your deliberation. So ethics, I think it's, I really like where it comes from. It means character, and traits would be honesty, respect, integrity, and professionalism. Next slide, please. And I want to make sure that there is a distinction between personal ethics and professional ethics. And obviously what we're dealing with tonight would be the professional ethics. That would be the corporate or the city's rules. Next slide, please. And so just a history as to how we've got here. So Plant and Moran has, they did 2 separate engagements for the city of Troy. And the first one, the report was actually issued July 17th of 2019. And in that report, they highly encouraged the city to review the tone at the top to ensure that all members of management and oversight uphold the values of honesty, integrity, and ethics, which will encourage the employees to uphold those same values. This also was supplemented by their November 18th, 2020 report, which was after an investigation. And they had some specific recommendations in that report as well. Ethics training, zero tolerance policy for any financial impropriety, a code of conduct. And I was looking back to see, and I don't know that they actually looked at the city council's code of conduct, and obviously it has been amended as well. But they do recommend a code of conduct be in place. They also wanted to see timely dissemination of information so that council can make informed decisions. And they also tied back to the recommendations from the July 17th of 2019 report. Next slide, please. And so things have been done in response to Plant Moran and just in response to different changes that have been made. So number one, city administration has already reported on its completion of those steps from the July 17th, 2019 report. I see that Mr. Bruner and Mr. Miller are both on, and I'm sure that they are happy to address any follow-up that you have on that, or any questions that you have. Additionally, the city's whistleblower policy, this was amended in 2017. So this was before the Plant Moran report, but it is fairly recent. And so I wanted to make sure that was pointed out. And there was a change that was made, and that allowed reporting to the city manager or the city attorney or council members as appropriate. Another thing that has been implemented is an onboarding or an orientation process for new council members. And of course, that contains an ethics component. Also, training, and this is something that has been done pretty much all along, and this is something that's been a goal of mine. Training is offered to any incoming board members and also to the boards as a whole. So I did go to the Parks and Rec Board at their last meeting, and I did a presentation just basically talking a little bit about conflicts and, when you should not be voting on an item, Open Meetings Act, the Sunshine Laws, the Freedom of Information Act. Additionally, the city has hired an outside consultant to facilitate the personnel evaluations that City Council has to do. That's for your direct reports, which would be the city manager and myself. And Council has already implemented that. And I think that was a step that was recommended by Plant Moran, and it seems to be working well. And then last but not least, the City Council Code of Conduct has been amended, or Ethics Code has been amended. Next slide, please. So, this is a code of ethics for U.S. government service, and this is from 1958. I am not going to go through all of these, but this is something that, again, has been around for a long time, and there are just certain things that government employees and government officials should be adhering to. And this code from 1958 sets forth a lot of those mandatory elements that you're going to find in a code of ethics or a code of conduct. Next slide, please. And so I've already talked about this has been in place since 1958. I did want to just mention there are two different aspects. So you have a code of conduct, which actually would talk about aspirational principles. And so that's not something that is going to be a black letter law that, you cannot do this. So the aspirational principles, usually that provides some guidance for, how you should enter into the decisions that you need to make. It also would set forth some behavioral standards. And I applaud all of you for engaging in this exercise, for doing this training. This is essential that you're all discussing what you expect and what types of values you hold as your aspirational values. And that's going to result in a better code of conduct for the city. Not that we don't have a great code of conduct, but that's, it's good to discuss and to also just to be apprised of what the provisions are. I thought that I think it's important that we talk about ethics because the first one, Baron John Fleischer, ethics is obedience to the unenforceable. I think that ethics is a really tough thing to be able to figure out. Again, there's a lot of gray, not as many black letter lines for you shall do this or you shall not do this. Michael Josephson is a well-known person who speaks on ethics. Ethics is not about the way things are, it's about the way things ought to be. And then, of course, I had to throw in a Supreme Court justice. So Potter Stewart, ethics is knowing the difference between what you have a right to do and what is right to do. Next slide, please. So with all of these ethics things, there are a number of things, and again, this is reminiscent of the 1958 policy, but there are a number of non-negotiable standards. So you have your aspirational standards, which again are more like the conduct, and then you have your non-negotiable standards. And these should be in any ethics policy for government service. Upholding and obeying the laws. You have to make your decisions in the public interest, and they should be independent and based upon your best information. No acceptance of gifts or favors, avoiding undue influence, and no granting of special favors. Prohibiting conflicts of interest, both personal and also professional. Not using public resources for private purposes or for other entities. Not engaging in discrimination, and transparency is absolutely paramount, except for those very limited circumstances when confidential communications and confidential information are provided. And if that's the case, then you must honor the confidentiality. Next slide, please. So there are several ethics rules and regulations that are found within the city. And these are in charter mandates, these are ordinance mandates, these are in administrative orders, these are in state statutes, and there's also a council code of ethics and an employee code of conduct. Next slide, please. And I'm not going to detail all of these because I put more information in the memo that you received, but there are a number of provisions that are set forth in Troy's charter. 4.6 is one that talks about you have to be orderly in your meetings. Also, it puts a little bit of an emphasis on the chair of the meeting and making sure that there is an orderly meeting. 4.7 prohibits financial conflicts. 4.8, that is the section that allows for council to initiate an investigation. And then if you refuse to participate, then that is actually a misconduct in office. I'm sorry, nepotism is when you hire some family members, and that is not something that is allowed. I'm sorry.
Take a break, Lori. Drink some tea. Take a break. We're okay.
Thank you.
We're not going anywhere.
Sorry about that. I'm really not sick. I'm just, I don't normally talk this much.
You're just so excited about ethics, it's got you all choked up. That's what it is.
I know, yes. 6.2, that is one of the sections that we are most familiar with because that really talks about the purchasing and contracts. So that is a section that all of you should be very familiar with. And then I also wanted to briefly talk about section 6.4. This allows for removal only in a number of very limited circumstances. And so this would be misconduct in office. And it's, there is a right for council to remove, but there must be a due process hearing. And again, there are only a limited number. And then the governor also has powers of removal for officers, and that's set forth in the Michigan Constitution. Next slide, please. I'm not sure how many of you have received a copy of these policies, and I think that's something at the end that perhaps we can change that for the future. But there are really two administrative memos that, in addition to a number of ad memos that apply to city staff, city employees, these two are ones that council should be familiar with. And the first one is IP 69, and that is the policy prohibiting harassment and discrimination. And this allows for complaints against employees and also officials. You elected and or appointed officials. Complaints would be filed with the Human Resources Director. But there are also situations where a complaint could be filed with the city manager or the city attorney in some circumstances. And then the person who receives the complaint, so the HR director or the attorney or the manager, would conduct an investigation, determine if there's any merit to the complaint, and then they would forward for further action. So further action, if it's an employee, obviously that would go, the city manager would have ultimate authority over that. If it is a council member, then the council would have the ultimate authority. The second one is the whistleblower policy, which is IP3. And again, employees can file complaints for any violation of law or administrative memos. And there are also provisions under state law and employee code of conduct that require a person who is aware of other persons violating laws that they must come forward. So this basically protects anyone who does come forward, but it does allow for city council to receive complaints directly. If it's a complaint against one of your direct reports, the city manager, the city attorney, then it must be forwarded to all of the city council members. It can be initially given to one, but all city council members would ultimately receive it. In addition, if it's not one of your direct reports and they're not satisfied with the administrative response, then that also can be brought to the attention of the city council. Next slide, please. And I'm not going to go into these a whole lot because they're pretty self-explanatory, but there are state law provisions that also govern the city employees' behavior and also city officials' behavior. Additionally, there are ordinances, two of them in particular. There are probably more, but and actually I didn't include on here the purchasing ordinance, which is obviously another one that we must comply with. But there is a city employee code of conduct, and that's found in our ordinances chapter 4. Additionally, chapter 14 talks about the disclosure statements, and all of you know about the disclosure statements because you've all had to file them. You had to file them when you were a candidate for city council. And some of you, if you were on a board or committee, you had to file them. For certain boards and committees as well. City employees who have in positions that are really subject to outside influence, they also need to file these. And these are on file with the city, and persons can FOIA and find out who has given, what property interests do you have? Who has donated to your campaigns? Who has, what types of gifts do you have? What types of businesses do you have? All of that is set forth in chapter 14, and that is applicable to council as well as some select city employees. Next slide, please. So the council code of ethics, one of the things that I think is important is the council code of ethics. It has been revised, but hopefully tonight you will have an opportunity to really sit and talk about this and see if this is what you want it to be. Does this reflect the code of ethics and the values that all of you have? And so I gave you a copy of the code of ethics in the packet, but the next few slides also talk about that. I'm not going to read each one because you can read them yourself, but that is going to be one of the things that is a discussion point. Are you satisfied with the council code of ethics, or is this something that you would like to see amended or modified? Next slide, please. And maybe we can have this. I wanted to have this available in case council wanted to see it. So I won't go over all of it now. Perhaps that's something that individual council members can ask to have brought up. So next slide, please. And then again, this is, there's actually, we're not quite done yet. So, sorry. Thank you. The ICMA, the Council Code of Ethics actually does rely in large part on the ICMA Code of Ethics. Now, the ICMA Code of Ethics is applicable to city managers and executives, but there are a lot of the provisions that also would apply to city council members. So a lot of it, the city council's code of ethics does repeat a lot of the tenets that are found in the ICMA code of ethics. Yes. And next slide, please. Okay, thank you. I wanted to spend a little bit of time with this because right now the Code of Ethics does allow for any suspected violation by another city council member. This can be forwarded to the Troy City Council for action. And again, as with any, anytime that there is any potential discipline or negative action to be taken, there is a right to a due process hearing. And a due process hearing would be the right to have an attorney, the right to notice, the right to confront any accusers, and the right to, to ask questions of anyone who is presenting evidence against them. That's really what a due process hearing would be. So then if after considering all of the information, the Troy City Council determines that there was a violation of the Code of Ethics, then the City Council may censure the offending City Council member or take any other action that's allowed by law, including but not limited to a request for a criminal misconduct investigation. And I wanted to just point out that the criminal misconduct investigation is going to be separate. It's going to be a prosecuting attorney that would be handling that. And not, that would not be something that would be handled by the City Council. I also wanted to talk a little bit about censure because censure is it's essentially a reprimand, but it's more official. It's something that it's actually on file, but it's a reprimand of a city official. Next slide, please. And so I think it is very important to talk about the enforcement of the Code of Ethics. There are limits to what elected officials can be punished with, if you will. If there's a violation, then really censure is one of the only things that can be taken independently. There are some, there is the opportunity for removal, but there does have to be a due process hearing, and it's only in very limited cases when there is misconduct. And misconduct, there really needs to be corrupt intent that is shown. So it is a very high standard to demonstrate that there is misconduct in office. Censure is really the only opportunity for elected officials, other than there's a recall petition, and the remedies, of course, are the ballot box. So that's why with elected officials, there are limits to what the consequences can be. Now for employees, that's different. Employees can face discipline up to discharge. So that is different than the elected officials. And I wanted to just mention here that with the employees, city administration works very collaboratively. We have outside labor council and employment council, and there's a discussion of all of the consequences that should be imposed on an employee who is found to be violating an ethics code or committing misconduct in office or committing some kind of unethical behavior. Again, there is a due process right. under, if they're looking at discharge, there are due process rights. But another factor too with employees, you also have some collective bargaining agreements and/or Act 78 Civil Service Commission. Those are different. They provide additional opportunities for hearings to challenge the discipline. So there is a difference between employees and elected officials, and not just with the penalties, but just also the steps that are taken, the consultation. It's a wide bevy of law that talks about employees and what you can do with employees. There's not as much law about when it's an officer who is committing the misconduct. And then I want to just again stress the point that there may also be separate criminal proceedings, but again, the standard is showing a corrupt intent. Next slide, please. So my discussion points for council, and I'm pretty much done with my portion of it, but and I don't know, Mayor, how you wanted to do this, but I do have about 4 discussion points with with sub points too, and this is something that I'd like to have council discuss and provide input. And I don't know if you wanted to have me read them all and then individual council members can talk about all of them at once, or if you wanted to go with each one of the discussion points.
Great. Great question, Lori. First of all, great presentation so far. Thank you very much. A lot of information, but you've synthesized it down to a point where you were able to present it to us in a meaningful way so far, plus the memo that you provided. Really appreciate. I know that it's a long time coming, but we appreciate the amount of time and research you put in to provide us these options of what you've done. So thank you as a starting point. My kind of vision for this, I'm wondering, I think we should discuss the discussion points separately. I also want to say I really wish we were sitting around the boardroom table like we would normally be for a study session. I think that would make a conversation much easier to facilitate, but we understand we can't do that. But I think we should go through each discussion point independently, give everyone on council an opportunity to weigh in if they feel they want to. And then certainly when we're done with your discussion points, if there's something more specific individual council members want to delve into, whether they've got some work they've prepared on their own or something they've been thinking about that hasn't already been addressed, I think that would be at the appropriate time to go down that path as well. I'm wondering also if it might be appropriate now for a couple or a few short questions, if we have any questions based on what you presented before we jump into these discussion points. Certainly, if we start to question on something that you think is going to be covered by a discussion point on a slide that I can't see or something, maybe you could let us know and that would be fine. But does that make sense with everybody else? Is that, and I guess we'll go around the table as if we would when we go to that. We'll just do it on the screen. But so I guess we'll start with any questions so far based on what we've seen or what we've heard. If anything specifically has come up for anybody on if they need clarification, something in the memo, something that was just said, we'll start there. Councilmember Hamilton.
Thank you, Mayor. And like you said, thank you, Lori, and everyone for all this information, everything you provided over the weekend. If anyone wants to look at the agenda packet for this, it's massive. It has ethics ordinances and charter provisions from communities all around the Metro Detroit area. So it kind of gives a sense of where we stand compared to other communities. I'll comment, I guess, a little later on, because what kind of is rolling around in my head is, what do we put in the charter? What do we put in an ordinance? What do we put in a code of conduct? Each different level is harder. It kind of locks in those provisions more in the future and makes it harder to change them should another council come up in the future that has a different vision for ethics. So to me, where we divide, that's really important. But my question was, I guess, when it talked about removal from office and corrupt intent, like if you look at our charter when it comes to both pecuniary interest and when it comes to disclosure of, like receiving gifts, our history was with this council and the former city manager, was gifts were received that shouldn't have been, how is that defined as a corrupt intent that could lead to removal from office? Would it be someone gets like a $5 cup of coffee versus, $10,000 thing? How do you kind of determine, because as far as when I read the charter, I kind of get the sense that if a council member receives a gift from someone that is involved with something we're voting on and you don't disclose it, that is grounds for misconduct and removal from office. And I guess maybe one thing I think about with the charter is there seems to be an ambiguity there that maybe we can clarify. So I guess to City Attorney, what are your thoughts on that? Like, where is that line drawn? Should we draw those lines? And I guess how does corrupt intent really work as far as removal from office?
The harder question is how does corrupt intent work? Because that's really a decision that has to be decided by the decision maker, the ultimate decision maker, whether or not there was corrupt intent. So whether that's a judge that's deciding in a criminal prosecution, whether or not an actor has acted with criminal intent, or whether that's counsel after a due process hearing. So that's the harder question. And again, a lot of these ethical principles and ethical decisions, there are not very many bright lines. I know that some ordinances would have, like, for example, if it's $75 or more, then that could be considered, exceeding the amounts. That is something that you have the ability to do. I would just caution you, if you were to do it in a charter provision, it's really hard to change, and cost of living increases and things. It would be very difficult to have let's say $75. I also want to just mention too, there are sometimes grand openings, and you would receive food at these grand openings. That is actually a benefit for the new establishment that is having you there, and so those are difficult things. And again, you could write 100 pages of a code of ethics, and there would still be ambiguity, and there would also still be opportunities for someone to circumvent, and to if they have that corrupt intent, then they will try and circumvent whatever the code of conduct is.
Right. No, I know it's like you said, there's no fine line here. This is tricky, and this is this kind of things I'm thinking about. But I'll let others ask questions because I have a lot more to say, but I'll save it for the ground.
Just expect that most of Lori's answers tonight are going to be "it depends," as we learned in law school. I know Anne's laughing because she knows, but it depends, right? No, but a good question to start us out, David. Thank you. I think Councilmember Chamberlain-Craig, I saw your hand go up as well for a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for that great presentation, City Attorney Bloom, and for the backup material that we had to study with and work with over the weekend. There was a lot of great examples of what our neighboring municipalities are doing on the topic. Question I had is around ethics training. Of course, that's a recommendation that came out of the recent Plant Moran report. I know you mentioned going to the Recreation Parks and Rec Board recently. And I know that you work with us as we're onboarded. You kind of give us an overview around elements of ethics. Is it, to understand correctly, are we looking to meet that recommendation of Plant Moran to do something more comprehensive and something that potentially we would revisit yearly, or do we feel that we have ethics training sort of embedded based on what you do?
And that actually is on the next slide. It is a discussion point, and that is something that council can decide what they want to do. But I think it is very worthwhile to, when you do, you have to review your council ethics each year. And I think it's beneficial for you, as well as the public, as well as our city employees, that there is a discussion, that it is a more formalized process when you're reviewing the ethics code of ethics. Perhaps there is, some a more formal process, I guess. But yes, so yes, absolutely. The minimum would be the onboarding for the new officials who are coming on, and that has been actually something that we've been doing actually all along. But Plant Moran really didn't specify how much training they thought was necessary, and that is something that I'm sure that council will give us direction on.
Absolutely. And I'll share more for later.
City Manager Miller, I see you unmuted and have raised your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and Council. I just wanted to bring up the Plant Moran review, and that it just so happens Assistant City Manager Bruner and I are meeting tomorrow. We'll be discussing that, and we've been going through that slowly and meticulously and clicking them off. And you will be hearing from us about some of the other items on that tasks that we need to get to. And of course, we would need your input if you want stronger or a different code of ethics, in which you can talk about a little bit later. But I wanted to make sure that you knew that Plant Moran review is not forgotten, and we're continuing to tick away at those tasks. Thank you. And real quick, Mayor, I know City Attorney Bloom went through all of the rules of conduct for employees, but I think it's important to note that sometimes our departments have their own rules, and most specifically, and I think most importantly, is the police department. They have a lot of different specific rules to the police department that if they don't follow those rules, it could rise to dismissal. Just as a notation that it can get very complex.
Thank you. Councilmember Hoderick, were you tentatively raising a hand? And you're muted.
Sorry, I thought I had clicked. I see these first two discussion points.
Yes.
Can I see, can we have a peek at what the others are?
Thank you, because that was actually going to be something I was going to try and text our IT person. But could you please go to the next slide, please? Thank you.
Okay. So it's primarily about an ethics, everyone's reading, but an ethics board creation, and then about the code of ethics or rules of procedure changes. So
Correct.
That's just, all right.
Mayor?
Yeah, Ellen, did you want to ask a question now that you can see what's on the other slide?
Yes, and I guess I don't want to be out of process. We were going to ask questions about Lori's presentation thus far. I guess I have a perspective with regard to the training piece. Would it be appropriate for me to comment, if you all don't mind, for me just to comment? It's not really a question, but when City Council was investigated, when we went through our Plant Moran review, it really gave an opportunity to reflect back. And going back to 2015, before we had huge issues surface about a year later, I can remember a circumstance where, now looking back, the fact I was the only new member on council that year. So I had an onboarding as a new member, and everyone else had already been on council for a while. There was a specific opportunity that had all 7 members of council had a fresh view in their minds of our code of ethics and the standard by which the city we uphold, or we ask our city to uphold him or herself to, depending on who's city manager. I think it may have prevented us from getting on the slippery slope we got on. And I think for me, the emphasis has to be on the deterrent factor of ending out in that situation again. And the reality is we can't come up with a one-liner for every possible eventuality of somebody to go into that gray area that violates a code. But I do think if we are trained or have reviewed as an entire body on an annual basis, that can help serve, we can help change, prevent landing on the slippery slope. When I attended MML training on ethics, they didn't get into the specifics. They just said, when you're growing into that gray area, remind yourself what those gray areas are on a constant basis. As an elected official, we're held to a very high standard. So my thinking is the fact is we have all the tools in the toolkit in our charter, our code. We needed to fix some things. We fixed our whistleblower process. There's some things that needed to be fixed that we've already fixed. I think the missing link is that training. And I remember asking for training, but we had a council that had a mixed reaction to whether that was necessary or not. I think this council would welcome it. If we said we wanted to do it once a quarter, you'd all nod your heads and we'd do it. But we had a problem of even getting on the same page in terms of that being a requirement. And I guess it just goes to my thinking that, we sign a code in November and commit to it and kind of slide it over to the city clerk and it's on file. Perhaps what we should be doing is having that, when we're signing that, having it as an agenda item on that council, at that council meeting. And at that meeting, there might be one new council member, maybe none. But each year when we sign that, we should re-review, have this kind of a discussion again to make sure we're all singing from the same hymn book. Because that was missing. And I think that's how the toothpaste got out of the tube. And once it's out, it's hard to put it back in. So I'd like to emphasize the proactive aspects we can take. Not that I'm against doing something reactive, but we just, from a fiduciary responsibility standpoint, that's what we want to prevent from ever happening, is being in that position. So there were several times when we couldn't all get on the same page, and Councilwoman Abraham, she comes out of the corporate world. I had too, where the training is constant and annual. So we had things forefront in our minds. We had fellow council members not functioning from that same place, if you will. How do we make sure that all of us are functioning from that level playing field from the get-go? I think that's the challenge. And how do we set that up so that it transcends us? When we're not on council anymore, when we have a new city manager, a new city attorney, what have we set up that sets a standard for making sure this is revisited constantly? So those are the questions that are rolling through my mind, and I just wanted to share that.
Well, we'll give you a pass for going out of process because you made some good comments, but I think that is absolutely one of the things we're here to talk about tonight, right? I mean, and you didn't pose a point of a question, but without getting too far off process, just I can say, I got elected to city council in November of 2015, and I barely remember the onboarding meeting I had with Lori. I think it was with Lori. I'll start there. I just come off a campaign, and you get sworn in 6 days later. And I think I remember meeting with Lori before. She gave me a binder, but I mean, no offense to Lori, an ethics training component of it, I don't remember anything other than, okay, I can't believe this is actually happening now. I need to figure out what's on the agenda. And I mean, it's all very fast. So to Ellen's point, and we can talk a lot about this now or a little later if you want, but I mean, I think that is very, very important. And I like your idea, Ellen, of making it more of a focus at that meeting when we signed them, to really reaffirm what they are, as opposed to just having something on a table in front of us that we sign and hand to Aileen, like you said. I mean, not that we take it lightly, but it becomes kind of a perfunctory process. It doesn't really have the same effect as if we're actually kind of forced to sit down and go through it. I wanted to ask a question along these lines to City Manager Miller and City Attorney Bloom, maybe if you could speak to what, just could you tell us a little bit and educate us and the public about what kind of ethics training each of you currently have and what your department heads and what staff is expected? I'm not sure the public really knows what that is, but it's my expectation. I mean, certainly as a lawyer, Lori, you have certain ethical requirements. And I know, Mark, you've been very active in getting your ICMA credentials. And so if you could both speak to that a little bit and speak to your departments, just so we kind of have an understanding of what the city is doing already from a staff process. And it doesn't have to okay.
Yeah, I guess I can start. So I am on the board of the International Municipal Lawyers Association, and one of that is a mandatory component for each seminar or each conference is that there is an ethics presentation. Also, I have actually presented on ethics for the Michigan boards. My staff as well attends the Michigan and also the IMLA and the conferences, and so they are very familiar with that. I would just also indicate that there is, as attorneys, we have our own set of regulations and our own set of standards that we must comply with. So there is an ethical component, and there's a grievance commission, attorney grievance commission, that would be governing over what we do.
Thank you. Yes.
So, as most of you may or may not know, that I started out my career in urban planning, and in the early 1990s, I became a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. There is a test, and a component of that test is ethics. And a couple years after I received my AICP, the American Institute of Certified Planners started required continuing education credits, and as part of that, every 2 years I have to have 4 hours of ethics training, specifically 4 hours specifically of law. And actually, they just passed new rules where I will need 4 hours of specific training in equity and inclusion, and also resilience. The only other person in City Hall that also is a member of the AICP is Brent Sabadan, our Community Development Director. And I would note that Ben Carlisle is also. So when I moved into the City Manager's Office, I became a member of the International City County Management Association, ICMA, and they do have a code of ethics, and they do have training. And I am a member, Bob Bruner is, and so is Sarah Ames, assistant to the city manager. I have also conducted ethics training mostly to planners, and you can actually get your credit by doing the training as opposed to taking a class. So specifically, I am not aware of any other employees who have a code of ethics, and I think that's a good thing that we should ask if they do, and we can put that together and maybe send it back to City Council. That's where we're at right now, and we'll report back to Council.
Thank you. Lori, you unmuted. Did you have a follow-up to that? Or because I was going to ask a follow-up question as well. But
yeah, I believe that many of our professionals have their own codes. So there are regulations of almost all of our different professions. I would just also indicate that city employees are required to know of the ad memos. There is a process where they have to actually sign off on the ad memos. They're given the handbook, the employee handbook. Obviously, they are supposed to know what the code of conduct is, and I believe that Ms. Menning has actually got something where she's going to be giving as an onboarding for them. She's going to actually have a separate document, which is the employee's code of conduct for every new hire that comes in.
Okay, great. As my follow-up to that, so as I'm hearing, there's nothing specifically that requires the city of Troy doesn't specifically require any specific ethics training for any city employees. Is that correct?
Not at this time.
That's correct.
But we have provided some.
Right. No, I don't doubt that. And I just, I guess my concern or thought on that is just because you have provided doesn't mean someone in the future will provide. And I think we're trying to look to equalize and take away that discretion a little bit so that it's more of a standard thing, or at least that's where I'm looking at this point. But yeah, I know definitely, I certainly, I know for a fact, based on previous past experiences, that our city employees are often more aware of what's right or wrong than some of the others that have been part of this council administration in the past. So they certainly are doing their job to maintain the ethics of the city, and I don't question that in the slightest. I just wanted to clarify that there wasn't anything specifically requiring any of that. And my second follow-up was with regard to the ad memos. Are those digitized and available for easy review? Is there a reason that they shouldn't be? I know that it's a lot of them, and there's a lot of, some of them are quite old. Some are being looked at probably as we speak as a constant project to see what needs to be updated. But I'm wondering if it would be possible at some point to, or if there's a reason not to, please let me know, to have that be an online portal potentially to have available and for transparency purposes. Just so us as council has the opportunity to easily review them, city employees, as well as the public if necessary, without having to go through FOIA. And you both unmuted, so I'll let you draw straws.
Go ahead, Lori.
Okay. So there is a method to the madness. And so if an employee, for example, there is an ad memo that requires our employees to wear seatbelts. And so that's just an example. So I am a little bit concerned if that is out in the public and an employee is not wearing their seatbelt and they're in an accident. I am a little bit concerned about that being used against the city as a potential basis for liability because it is a violation. So that is one of the reasons why we have not put all of the ad memos out there. Again, there are a lot of them that are just internal, dealing with internal things.
Sure.
And then also our police department. We absolutely need to make sure that we are not, for example, disclosing the tactics that officers would take in the event of, needing to stop an individual car, for example, needing to stop a fleeing felon. So yes, there are different standards. There are different reasons and rationales as to why they have not been disclosed. However, the whistleblower absolutely has been part of the council packet. And both of the policies, the discrimination policy absolutely is something that could be online. And there's no concern about having both of those prominently displayed on the city's webpage.
Mayor and council?
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
So all of the administrative memos are, even if they're really old and photocopied, they are digitized, and the new ones are obviously modern PDFs. And employees, whenever they start working for the city or a new administrative memo is created, they're required to go on, I believe, and certify that they have read the administrative memos. And they're all available on the intranet. And I honestly don't know if council members have the intranet available to them. It's an internal intranet, but all of them are digitized and all of our employees do have access to them all.
Well, and I don't think, and listen, our job is to do policy and not to do everyday management and so I don't think it's important for us to have to read all of them and whereas it would be for an employee. I'm just trying to think of what, for ease of that. I mean, certainly, I guess the risk is if we're only given certain ones, then those are the only tools we have, and maybe we're missing something somewhere else. But I completely hear, Lori, your concerns, and I guess I didn't realize that, see, this is how little I know about some of these ad memos, that there's police procedures in the administrative memos. I would have thought that was a separate, maybe a police manual, as opposed to something more what I've considered just ad memos. So that's my, again, how little I know on some of these things, I guess, right?
And just to clarify, they are separate. They are separate. So other city employees cannot, general city employees cannot review the ad memos for the police department. But again, the concern, as you have articulated, that if we're giving some and not all, may also lead to some problems down the line.
Where do you draw the line? Well, what would happen if, I'm not tempting fate, what would happen if those were FOIA though? Are those, I mean, is there an exemption that, I don't, that sounds like a legal thing. I'm just curious, I guess I'm struggling. And, you let the cat out of the bag with the seatbelt rule. So I'm worried about that one now. But and I don't want to belabor this any more than I already have. And I see Ellen's trying to raise her hand. But it's just, I guess I just want to make sure that we do know, obviously when we revised the whistleblower, well, we didn't revise it. Council did have an opportunity to put its stamp of approval on the revised whistleblower policy, as I recall, back when it was updated. But again, like the IP69, I know it exists, but I didn't, I don't necessarily know the words of it without having it be given to me like now, for example. So I'm just trying to figure out what would streamline some of this. And I've probably gone on for far too many minutes on that one alone. So I'll stop on that right now. Ellen, I saw that you raised your hand, or you were trying to. Did you have another question or a comment to shut me up?
I'm not trying to shut you up. But actually, I wanted to affirm what you were saying, where we're the policy setting body, and that's the reality. I mean, we could all research and read every ad memo and initial them ourselves, but a year from now, it's another council. And to get into the administrivia when we're the outside policy setting body, for us, I mean, I think our residents need to understand that's not only not our role, but it's almost impossible for us to be held to a standard where we would know all those details. And the key is to make sure we have individuals in place with the character and the ethics, and that we all collectively, I mean, in my opinion, that we all collectively share the same code to the best of our ability. And, a piece of this is the financial pieces. We do have a controller, and how, what's the professional standard on that piece of it that comes into play? Maybe Mark or Lori, the kind of that CFO oversight of the dollars and cents.
Mayor?
Yes, Mark.
I'm trying to understand the question a little bit more. You were asking about how the administrative memos would impact the financial management. I'm kind of missing the question a little bit.
I'm not even talking about the administrative memos, just the fact that we have, this is a study session, so just making sure we collectively understand the CFO's role, the controller's role in the process for helping with that oversight and making sure that that's there. The professional standard and the training they go through.
Right. We can give you a summary of that real easy enough. And we can provide that to you after this meeting. That would kind of explain their different roles, because there is a checks and balance. I'll give you an example. Out of the Plant Moran initial study, it was recommended that both the city attorney's expenditures and the city manager's expenditures on a monthly basis get revealed to city council. And initially we were putting that on the agenda each month, but now my understanding, because I didn't see it on the agenda and I was getting worried, my understanding is the controller sends it directly to council via an email. And hopefully that's happening, as an example.
Mark, I'm sorry. Could you check into that? Because I'm not sure I'm getting emails from anybody with that. So sorry to have that foot blow up like that right here, but if you could look into that and double check, I haven't got an email from anybody on that in a long, long time. City Attorney Bloom?
I do believe, and again, that's something that Mr. Miller will have to follow up on, but I do believe, again, the transparency of the city and our finances. In Open Troy, there is a lot of transparency, and so you can go and you can find out where all of the checks are cut. And I believe that our statements are part of the Open Troy as well.
Very good. Councilmember Erickson Gall.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is about a Board of Ethics. One thing that I noted in the Board of Ethics that I thought where I'm coming from would be good in, at least in principle, and seems to be missing from our existing ethics provisions is the ability of the public to lodge a complaint against elected or appointed officials. I'm not seeing anything in our existing charter, ordinance, or ethics code that allows anyone to lodge a complaint that would be investigated. Certainly a city council member, if they become aware of something, can bring something in front of the entire city council based on our code of ethics, which again, I was getting sidetracked thinking that our code of ethics is essentially an agreement between the members of council and needs to be re-ratified every year. And perhaps that needs to be more of an ordinance, but I digress. My real question is, do we have any provisions in our existing charter, code, ethics, or our ordinances that allow a member of the public to bring forth what they believe to be an ethical violation that would then get investigated?
Great question.
Yes, the ad memos, actually, the ad memos do apply to city council members. And so that does provide the ability to file complaints against council members as well as city officials, city employees, I'm sorry.
But how does the public know about this? Where is the process for the public to understand how they would go about lodging a complaint? For instance, if there's a member of public that knows that there's a city council member who's taking inappropriate gifts from somebody who does business with the city, how would a member of public be able to know how to lodge a complaint, and what's the procedure for them to do that?
So it actually is fairly inorganic in that we have a portal, a citizen's complaint, portal that actually is like a citizen inquiry. So that is one way that persons could send something, and then again we're going to direct that to the appropriate person. As you've mentioned, Councilmember Erickson Galt, all of the council members can be contacted, and then if there is a complaint brought, then there's an obligation to bring it to all of the council members. So somebody could file something to against with one person. As far as promoting how that can be done, that is something that you can do without a board of ethics. If council decides that they don't want to have a board of ethics, we can certainly put something on, again, maybe the ad memos and putting them on the city's webpage. Maybe even discussing, complaints against, it could be on the council webpage, that you could provide the way that complaints could be filed.
Okay. Would there be an advantage to having an independent board that's advertised as an independent board, obviously appointed by council, but people who are not members of council per se, or people who would have that ability to hopefully be more objective about matters, and have that out there so that the public knows that they can. And I notice also in some of these ethics boards, people are allowed to file confidential complaints. So, for instance, if somebody is concerned that they'll lose their job because they make the complaint, they have that ability to do so confidentially, at least initially. And then later, obviously, if there's a due process hearing, that confidentially may go by the wayside at that point. But it just seems to me that we're kind of lacking a clear mechanism for everyone in Troy, not just members of council or employees, but for everyone in Troy to know how they go about making a complaint. I guess that was more of a comment than a question.
And if I may, just to talk a little bit about Board of Ethics, and again, you guys are actually getting to the discussion points ahead of time, which is great because again, this is your meeting and your discussion. So, but I did want to point out that there are boards of ethics. I did provide to you actually more of the recent ones do have boards of ethics. But I will tell you that I talked to a number of communities where they have them, and there is really not a lot of activity that has been that has been presented to that ethics board. And I think part of that is because it's either the city manager or the city council that would ultimately need to do the final adjudication, if you will. So so again, it's adding a step, it's adding a layer. The independence is something, of course, that is, you know, something that may be desirable. But again, ultimately, it would be city council that would need to be the final adjudicator.
Thank you, Lori. Councilmember Abraham.
Just a follow-up question to Lori's comments on a board of ethics. I guess what powers would the Board of Ethics have to investigate matters? I mean, would they be doing it personally? Would they be engaging city resources to investigate? Would they refer it to a third party? I guess, I mean, I read the documentation that was in the agenda packet, but I don't know if there is a clear or at least a consistent answer on how cities that have them have been engaging them. I don't know if you could comment a little bit more on that, Lori.
As Mayor Baker said, I would be saying an awful lot. It depends. And I'm sorry to not be able to answer your question, but I think it depends on who the complaint is made against. And, you know, if it's a council member, most likely that is going to be sent out to outside legal counsel is going to be involved to do that investigation. If it's, you know, one of the higher ranking appointed officials, then very likely there would be, you know, an independent investigation that would be done. And again, council has the ability to do that on its own and have outside legal counsel appointed to actually do an investigation. If it is, I mean, what has been working and what we've had in place for other employees, the Human Resources Department generally is the investigator.
Thank you.
Any other questions about the presentation that we've had so far before we specifically move into these discussion points? Mayor Pro Tem Brooks.
Not as much of a question, more of a comment as well. Also, thank you, Lori, for this presentation so far. I guess when I started looking into this process of how we can kind of make our code of ethics more robust, one of the things I was really kind of hoping for was, you know, having a code of ethics that had teeth, so to speak, where there were more consequences to violations of the code of ethics. But it does look like maybe we are somewhat limited in kind of what we can do as far as consequences and things like that. And so I guess it does kind of go back to what Councilmember Hodrick was saying, maybe just really focusing on being more proactive versus reactive. But that was kind of something that just really kind of stuck out at me, is that I kind of felt before I started this process that maybe there was more that we could do to really hold people accountable, but it seems like it's somewhat limited, which is a little frustrating.
It's a good comment, and I think I want to just to piggyback on that, to again appreciate City Attorney Bloom for putting all of these different options that we already have before us in one kind of, these are the powers that you have, because I can speak from past experience, and a few of us can on here, that when issues maybe had come up, we didn't necessarily know where to turn, and we didn't really know what our options were. So I think actually just a big I feel like we've already crossed the first major step and hurdle in having, okay, look, these are the different charter provisions that we already have. These are these are the ordinances that are on the books. Now we can talk about, well, if we want to go to that next level, what can we do to make them better? I still think we can add some teeth, Mayor Pro Tem Brooks, where necessary in some way, or at least create the proactive requirements that have the same effective teeth in the long run, I think is my plan. And that the sad reality is, and I'm not the only one to have this thought, but it's really, and I think actually Ellen spoke to it a little bit earlier. It's really hard to legislate for the criminal mastermind, right? You can come up with all kinds of rules and you can do all kinds of things, but people who are good at manipulating and taking advantage of situations are really good at walking those lines. And we could have what we think is the best policy in the world, and they're going to know just exactly how to push up against it and maybe even challenge us in the process. So that's a little bit of a cynical, dark view of everything, but that's the reality we face, I think. So I guess my bottom line is don't be too disappointed. We can still make it better or stronger, but that's what we're here for, to try to figure out. And I do think there are things, and Lori tonight has given us a lot of tools and starting points. So, and I think some of those are in the discussion points. Were there any more questions specifically that we want to ask now, or does anybody feel like they need to ask before we get on to some more specific focused discussion points? Does anybody need to take 5 minutes? Don't be shy if we want to take, or Councilmember Abraham, was that a hand up with a question, or was that you want to take 5 minutes?
It was a question.
Okay.
So, but if we need to take a break afterwards, that's fine too. The question was, well, statement first. I think in terms of the employees, I think there are pretty good protections in place to make sure that there is teeth if there are violations. And where it gets more difficult is with the elected officials. There's less teeth there, and frankly, it's as Mayor Pro Tem Brooks said, it's really frustrating because that's where the erosion of public trust is so visible, as if it's with an elected official. It's one of the things outlined in terms of impact if the code of conduct or code of ethics were violated by a council member is censure, which doesn't seem all that strong. But I was wondering, Lori, if you could comment a little bit more on what that would entail and what that really means in terms of highlighting the ethics violation.
Good question.
And so a censure would actually, before you get to the point of a censure, you'd have to actually detail what the alleged misconduct was. So you'd have to actually put that out there. Of course, this would all be in the public domain. It would be a public hearing. And, again, it would be a very public proceeding where you would have witnesses that would be called in. You might have documentation. All of that would be a very public process. And so again, that would be contained. And so, Google searches or, and anything in the future would certainly, would certainly, you would certainly see that there was a censure. It may, the actions could rise to the level where council would direct that there be, that they'd be referred for a criminal investigation as well. So, perhaps that dialogue and that presentation of facts could lead to a criminal prosecution as well. And I would just, again, Mayor Pro Tem Brooks had, indicated that the options are limited. And part of that is, I know it's frustrating, but part of that is because each of you may have a different view as to what your duties are. And you may be coming from a different place. And as Mayor has indicated, there is likely to be pushback when it's an elected official. And, again, the remedy is that you vote that person out. if there is a censure, that certainly would be, I'm sure, considered by the voters at a future election.
Okay, thank you. Let's take 5 minutes and then come back and move to the discussion points. That's okay? All right, we'll be back in 5. the record, we kept it to a true 5 minutes, so I gotta hand it to everybody for that. That's pretty good. So we're back on the record with our special study session meeting this evening regarding ethics, and I will turn it back over to City Attorney Bloom, who will start with the first of several discussion points for council to provide input. City Attorney Bloom, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. And again, and a lot of the input, I thank you for all of the input so far. And I think that actually you guys are again, kind of dovetailing into all of these discussion points already. So I can tell you've done all of your homework and read all of those ordinances that were sent to you. And of course, I know our IT person is having some technical difficulties, but if you could go to the second to the last slide, thank you. So the first question is whether or not council wants to continue the longstanding policy separating the city employees from the elected and appointed officials. And again, we've already talked a little bit about this. There are different penalties, different enforcement mechanisms. And, you know, police, I think Councilwoman Hoderick had already mentioned about how police, it is, or maybe that was Manager Miller, the police department, they have a very robust internal affairs process and procedure. Also, you know, the employees do receive all of the ed memos. They receive some training. They've got supervisor guidance. So that's the first question, is whether or not the council wants to separate the employees from the, to continue the separation of the employees from the elected and appointed officials.
Let me kick that back to you first, City Attorney Bloom. To discontinue that longstanding separation, what would that look like? Or what would be the benefit?
Well, again, some of the communities have a board of ethics. But in essence, you're still, you know, even if a board of ethics is, you know, looking at the information, they're still going to remand it to the city manager to do the administrative process for all of the, you know, for the employees. So as far as what it would entail, it would require amendments to Chapter 4 at a minimum. It would require probably a new ordinance as well, a comprehensive ethics ordinance that would actually reiterate a lot of the points that are found in the charter. Some of them, again, they are, you know, duplicative. I mean, they are applicable to both employees and also council members, but there are a lot of other provisions that are really just applicable to employees.
Mayor, I have a comment.
Yes, City Manager.
I think we are under the council manager form of government, and some of the other strong mayor systems, department heads are political appointees, which we have, you know, zero technical political appointees, that you do hire a manager and an attorney. And I think because they're political appointees, that is one of the reasons why they have a board, which is a lot different than us, because you know, they serve at the pleasure of the mayor, and I think it adds a political dimension that we just don't have.
Well, I thank you for that, Mark. I appreciate that. I think I'm sorry, I just keep going first, but to me, that because of our form of government, I think there's a clear separation between city employees and elected officials and appointed officials already in how we operate things. And I'm hesitant for council to weigh too much into city employee issues, or, you know, I don't think it would be right for council, for example, to do an investigation of a city employee when it should be, unless it was the manager, for example, city manager or something, when that's what your, you know, HR director's role traditionally is. And I guess I'm struggling to see what the real, in our form of government, like you said, of what that real benefit would be. That doesn't mean I don't think that we could approach some mandatory ethics training as an overall umbrella over all of us. I think that might be a place where we could say, yes, both the appointed and elected and the hired city employees might make sense. But how about anybody else? I mean, we can go around the room if we need to, or if you want to just raise your hand if you have any thoughts on this specific discussion point. Councilmember Erickson Gall, and then we'll go to you, Ed, then.
Yeah, I would be hesitant to do anything that would seem like city council is micromanaging how the city manager and the department head should be conducting the business of the city. I think that our type of government, where, as we mentioned earlier, city council's main role is to set policy. And it's the role of the city manager, city attorney, and the department heads to determine how best to conduct things within their particular realm. And if we had one blanket code of ethics, who is going to be making the decisions on violations? I mean, I guess it could still be, the city manager, city attorney, or department heads that are making those decisions, or HR that are making those decisions. But and the other issue too is that there are ethics rules that apply to us that are not necessarily applicable in any way to, an average employee or even a high-level employee of the city. There's because of the danger of political influence and corruption that would apply to our positions that you wouldn't necessarily see in somebody who is working in the treasurer's office or driving a snowplow. They're not really facing the same sort of ethical challenges we are. They may have ethical challenges that we don't face as well. So it seems to me that our roles are sufficiently different. The roles of the elected and appointed officials are sufficiently different from the roles of employees that it wouldn't make sense to have a blanket ethics policy or a blanket procedure for handling ethics violations. They really should be two different tracks.
Thank you, Councilmember Erickson Gall. Councilmember Abraham?
Thanks, Mayor. I tend to agree with Ann. I think the roles are sufficiently different where it doesn't make sense to lump all different employee groups, for lack of a better term, together because the challenges that are faced are different enough. One thing that I am thinking through, and maybe this is a discussion point for all of us, is, understanding that, the police may have a different sort of code of ethics training that's different from what council may do versus other city employees or appointed officials. Does it make sense for all of us to go through yearly code of ethics or yearly ethics training? Is that something that we should entertain so that we build that culture of ethics that much more strongly throughout the city? It like I said, it could look different for someone that works in the finance department than it does for us. But I feel like every year everyone needs to do something. That's pretty standard in the industry. Every year I go through training. Every year I go through disclosure. Every year I have to disclose any gifts that I've gotten, which I haven't gotten any, or would I accept any? But this is just pretty standard, and I'd like to see that application in some form translate to the municipal side if it's not already there.
Absolutely. I'll +1 that for all you Zoom people. That's a big. Anyone else at the table here would like to speak directly to this discussion point? Councilmember Hamilton.
Just I agree with what everyone else is saying, but nothing else.
Councilmember Chamberlain-Craig and Councilmember Hoderick are nodding their heads. Mayor Pro Tem Brooks is a thumbs up. So, we've got, look how Councilmember Chamberlain-Craig.
I'll just say really quickly, I think another added layer, totally agree with what's been said, is to whom are you accountable? And if you look at the org chart, the people we are immediately accountable to are our residents. If we look at other staff members, they're accountable immediately to other department heads and structures. And so I think that's just another reason why it makes sense to keep it separate. So totally support that thinking.
That's great. I think City Attorney Bloom, you kind of hear where we are on this one. I don't think I'll try to, if I make sense of it. We don't think we need a blanket policy, a process that applies to both sides, but training across the board sounds like a good idea. So that's one little thing we can add to where we're going. And unless anyone else has any follow-ups to this discussion point, or City Attorney Bloom, you have any other comments regarding this specifically, we can move on to the next one. All right, City Attorney Bloom.
And that actually does tie into the next point, and that is, so that training aspect. For city employees, it certainly could be added to the code of conduct, which is in an ordinance already for the employees. It could also be added to either the council rules of procedure or the council code of ethics. But you also may want to have a separate ethics ordinance that basically reiterates what we have. It just be a reemphasis and just a duplication, putting them in one place. So I guess that's the next question: is do you are the rules and regulations, assuming that there is the training and assuming that there is a discussion and education as to what those regulations are, is there a need for a separate ethics ordinance?
Who wants to start? Councilmember Erickson Galt.
I think so, yes. One of the things I noticed in the presentation is though we seem to be hitting a lot of the same points as other communities' ethics ordinances, but all of their points are centralized in one location. There's one place you go to find out what are all the ethics rules for the city of Canton or the city of Clawson or Macomb Township. We, on the other hand, we have charter provisions, we have ordinances, we have ethics, code of ethics, which isn't really a code per se. It is a annually ratified agreement between the existing members of council, and if we had a complete turnover in council, that code could just go away tomorrow. Whereas an ordinance would be in place and would be a lot more difficult for future council members to decide that they just don't want to sign it. They just don't want to be part of it. So I think it would be a good idea to have one standard centralized location, whether that's an ordinance. I know there's been some discussion. I think it was Councilmember Hamilton had talked about perhaps putting it in the charter, but I think he also mentioned earlier that makes it difficult to then amend it, because amending the charter is a lot more difficult than creating a new ordinance. So in sum, my thought is it would be good to have one central ordinance that is not necessarily written in stone, but more solidified and more long-term, that would incorporate all of these ethics rules that are in that City Attorney Bloom pointed out are in various locations.
Well put. So Councilmember Hamilton.
Yes. Right. I think I agree with you, Councilmember Erickson Galt, mostly. My thoughts on the charter is I do agree that the ordinance should probably be the comprehensive piece that kind of brings everything together to make all the rules kind of spelled out. But I do think there's a role for the charter, not to get into the nitty-gritty details, but when something's in the charter, it gives it more longevity. So if a new council comes along, they can't just wipe out the ordinance. They could, in theory, wipe out the code of ethics, not agree to it. They could wipe out the ordinance, though that adds a few more steps. You have to have public hearings and everything. But once it's in the charter, it requires a vote of the people to change. So obviously things that need to be nimble, might need to change here and there. We don't want to put in the charter like city attorney said, like a $75 limit on gifts or something. You wouldn't want that in the charter, obviously. But I do think there's a role for it, because I'm thinking long term here is that if another council comes in with a different idea of what ethics are, I don't ever want to go back to where we were. And as Mayor Baker said, if you have unethical people in positions of power, there's only so much you can do to prevent them besides voting them out. But I'd like to, there's some things in the charter I'd like to clarify, and then I kind of want to, it's really hard to know, but there's some provisions I'd like to see in there and some that are better suited for the ordinance. And I guess it's a debate for a lot smarter people than me to know what goes where. But right now we already have charter provisions regarding ethics. And is that optimal? I know that there's a lot of things in our charter I know we need to change a little bit. We've talked about this in the past, maybe reconvening the charter revision committee. But to me, I don't think it should just be in the ordinance. I think there's some role for the charter to give some more permanence, longevity to some things. I'm not clear what should go where, and I think it's something we need to debate, but I'm open to that. I don't know where I'm going with this, but that's kind of my thoughts at the moment.
Good points. I would love to see the next campaign season against the council that gets rid of the ethics ordinance, but that's a whole other issue. I mean, that would be a lot of fun, but that's, sorry. But to your point, it absolutely could happen. And then where do we go from that? I get that. I understand where you're going. Who's next? Councilmember Hoderick.
The ordinance, the one place for the information, I agree with Councilwoman Erickson Galt that that kind of a revision could be helpful. But I really come back to I really feel concern, come November, there could be 3 new members of this council with none of the history that we have had. With ethical challenges, code challenges that we've faced in the city. So, when you think about that, that's less than a year away. Making sure we put it as part of our rules of procedure to almost, I don't know if the word is codify, but make it a rule, the rule of procedure, that we have that review. Almost you guys did a great job, city staff, Assistant City Manager Bruner, with the onboarding, our newly instituted onboarding sessions that went on with the new council members. This would almost be like a mini onboarding, with the focus being on how we work together to practice really good, solid governance in a nutshell. And it's the ethics that lead it there. So I think that's, for me, the actionable, active, really relevant step that we could take. So that second bullet point speaks to me, speaks to my heart on this, I guess. And I'm really all about that.
Thank you, Councilmember Hoderick. Can I ask a follow-up question to that, City Attorney Bloom? Could you just briefly remind us of timing procedures to draft a new ordinance and notice requirements versus updating a code of conduct and code of ethics, and how quickly we could do one, how long it's likely to take for the other, just so we can have that as part of our thought process?
Absolutely. The code of ethics, amending the code of ethics, it could happen at the next meeting if council directed that to happen. That is a much quicker process. Drafting a comprehensive ordinance that actually pulls from all of the different charter provisions and puts them in one place, that will take some time. And we also, you have not seen a whole lot of ordinance revisions being brought to you while we're meeting virtually. And that is intentional as well, because we want people to have as much knowledge of ordinances as they can. So that might cause a delay. And I just also want to focus a little bit on, there still are, even though we do have charter provisions, there still are some state law provisions too, and those are not likely to change. Actually, they've been in place for many years. And so, again, there's not a whole lot of activity. So yes, it is possible that that the next council could come in and get rid of some of the what I'll call the aspirational goals. But those critical, those critical elements of a code of conduct or a code of ethics, they are not going to be able to be removed because they follow state law.
Very good. Thank you. Who's next? Anybody else want to speak to this discussion point? No. Councilmember Chamberlain, Kiernan.
So, Mayor, I think I'm going to hold to the next conversation on ethics boards because it would affect an ethics ordinance. But just to say quickly, I absolutely support the idea of a one-stop shop, having all of this in an ethics ordinance. Around a charter amendment, I think my question would be is what would that evolve in terms of resources, time on the part of city staff? I think that's something that while I totally understand what Councilmember Hamilton is saying about further enshrining something that cannot easily be dismissed, I think just, sensitive to just the information campaign that would be involved and all of that. I wonder if City Attorney Bloom could speak about kind of the time and resources and even financially that might be involved in doing something like that and our residents voting on it.
It's a great question. City Attorney Bloom?
It's been a few years since we've had a proposed charter amendment that's been submitted to the voters. And generally, there is a lot of work that goes into it because it's very difficult to draft the questions. We're limited on the amount of words that you can use for each of the questions as well. And also it does go to the Charter Revision Committee for their input as well. We have routinely sent out educational pieces to the voters each time that there is a proposed amendment or a ballot question for them. So there would be some expense in preparing that, disseminating that. Obviously, a lot of time in crafting the exact language for the proposed charter amendments.
Thank you. Councilmember Abraham.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm inclined to get something established or at least modified sooner rather than later. So my thought is, perhaps we take this in a few steps where one, we look at the code of ethics we have today, make suggested changes to it and bring that forward just to take that first step as a body. And then, I think we still have some discussion on whether we want to proceed as an ordinance or a charter amendment. Maybe we do all three. I'm not quite there yet, of course, but maybe we take it in pieces so that we have a progression of activity. Just to follow up on the city attorney's comments about what it would take to create a new ordinance, I guess, Lori, if we didn't have the COVID situation where it's a much easier to bring in an ordinance change and make sure that we had the right public engagement, if we took that out as a factor, how long would it take to draft? Is it weeks? Is it months? I'm just trying to get some bookends of time in terms of what it would take just for an ordinance change if we were in normal times.
That's a hard question to answer because, again, we're limited on our staffing and there are a lot of other ordinances that we have committed to providing for council consideration. And some of those actually, are because the laws have changed. So I'm not sure where this would fall in the prioritization. So yeah, I wish I could say that it would be a really quick turnaround, but in reality, based on our workload and based on the fact that we've got, I've got a number of other ordinances that we've not been able to even get to bring them. It would probably be a little bit of time.
Appreciate the candor.
Mayor Pro Tem, are you good, Edna, for now? Mayor Pro Tem Brooks.
Thank you, Mayor. I definitely agree with Councilmember Erickson Galt that I do support having an ordinance where somebody could just pull up our ethics policy and just kind of see it across the board. I think that would help a lot. As far as the charter amendment, I'd have to think about that a little bit more because that is a bit more involved. And I guess I would have to know exactly what language and what the goal, exactly what we're trying to do with the charter amendment, because it is a lot. It's a much more involved process, it appears. But I definitely agree with an ordinance.
Thank you. I will. I absolutely think we need a comprehensive ethics ordinance. How we get there and what we direct you to put in it is the other issue, I think, as always. To my colleagues that have said we should piecemeal it a little bit, I fully agree with that as well. I'd like to see us move on some required annual training as part of our council rules of procedure and our code of ethics. I think those can be done in much easier amendments. Obviously delegating what those trainings are, and the process, of course, goes to you and city management, and city attorney's office, which, it's easy for us to say, go ahead and do it. But I think that is absolutely what we need for all the reasons stated so far. But I would like us to see us move towards that comprehensive ethics ordinance, because what I said several minutes ago about it was nice to see all of this kind of in one place. I think that we as a city need that from a council standpoint, from an employee standpoint, and from a resident standpoint. I promise you, most residents in our city who are paying attention don't realize all of the tools that exist already, or all of the clauses that are already out there. And I'd like them to know that, one, we have them already, but two, here we've taken them and we've made it easier for you as residents to understand and have it put together. And I know, City Attorney Bloom, you do have a lot of ordinance changes you're working on. It's been a process that actually, as long as I've been on council, and I'm sure predating that, it's all every year. It's okay. Well, we've got to update these ordinances to get current with law changes and also get rid of the outdated ones. So I know that's a constantly moving process. But I think, from a policy standpoint, this should be a higher priority, even if we're able to make the quicker changes to the code of ethics and even the council rules of procedure. When we did our medical marijuana policies and some of those other big ordinances, I know those take time. That's just a reality of the process, and we want them to take time, and we want you to take sufficient time, because we certainly don't want anything that's going to put us in legal issue down the line. We want to make sure there's proper due process, and we want to make sure that we've covered all of our bases. And we know that your thoroughness as city attorney, it's one of your many strengths, Lori. So I know that I recognize the importance and value of the time that it takes. That said, I do think it's so important. I'm imagining, as we move into the next section, as we talk about a board of ethics, some on council are probably going to want to talk about including some of that as well, I'm guessing, based on what I've heard so far. So maybe we can kind of ease that conversation into that next discussion point. And then hopefully, when we get to any other input from council, we can kind of try to encapsulate it all. I see Councilmember Hoderick wanted to say something first.
In the meantime, because it is great to have this all in one place, we do have on the council page where our code that we signed, there's a link for what that code is. Maybe a 10-cent solution for the moment would be to take these materials that have been gathered together for this presentation tonight and this discussion and have them there encapsulate it, it would essentially be, a mini training session right there on a link, so that when residents are looking and trying to understand the tools that we use for the Code of Ethics and where they all are currently, maybe they could be parked there. IT could maybe work some magic or something like that. In the near term, almost an immediate term, that could happen. Then allowing some breathing room for the ordinance to be developed as it should be in a thorough way. Just a suggestion.
Great point.
And Mayor, actually, if I could just ask for IT to pull up the very last slide, that would be helpful. And then also, I think, again, I have no objection to that. I'm sure that Mr. Miller would not object to having the IT department put it on the webpage, and, the memo, as well as, and all of the materials. If you want all of the materials, it's already part of the packet. And certainly we can have a link on the city's webpage.
I think that would be great. Any objections from anybody on that? It seems like a good idea. All right.
And so, Mayor,
go ahead.
yeah, well, just moving into the next point, which would be the ethics board and whether or not there's consensus on council to have an ethics board. And then there are a number of subsets to that as well. Would council be the one to hold the due process hearing? Because again, council would be the final adjudicator of any complaints that were brought against council members or board and committee members. And, again, do you want a supermajority that would be required in order to have, any action taken? That's a consideration. Who would make the meritorious determination? Again, if you're creating a separate ethics board, that's, something that should be discussed. And then also, are the complaints going to be confidential, or are the complaints going to need to be verified? And then again, what is that process? Do we hire outside legal counsel? So a number of different issues that would be brought up with an ethics board, and it would be helpful to know if there is a consensus of council as to whether or not it's beneficial to create that extra layer.
Very good. Councilmember Chamberlain-Carranga, do you want to start? You had kind of pushed off on the last one to talk about it. I'll let you go first.
I'm happy to, Mayor. Thank you. So just to start, I think I'm going to be honest. I am interested. I'm intrigued. There's a lot more I want to know about it. Part of it comes from my former life. When I was at the World Bank, I worked in a department and had the honor to serve on a demand for good governance community of practice, which was all about helping client governments implement practices to hold themselves more accountable to their residents. So I'm very interested in different mechanisms by which you do that. And then thinking of Troy, thinking of the Plant Moran report and reflecting on what has led us to this situation. Why are we here having this conversation? And I think I approached this whole conversation tonight as thinking about what's the problem? Like, why are we here? And how might we go about fixing it? What are the methods? And so I think kind of like what Councilmember Erickson Galt shared, I was thinking about what happens when you have cases whereby there is a culture of complicity, or where there is a tone at the top on council and residents may question whether or not council is acting in the best interest of residents. They may question whether or not we are doing our jobs in managing our direct reports, the city manager, the city attorney, and essentially there's no recourse. We've been saying the only recourse is the ballot box, voting out council members. And I think before City Attorney Bloom clarified, I wasn't aware that any of the existing sort of charter provisions or code of ethics, my understanding was they did not, that there was no kind of recourse through them. I have learned tonight that the administrative memorandums can be used. It sounds like only through the best you can get out of that in terms of teeth is a censor. And so I think what my question is how can we create a system whereby our residents can hold ourselves and our direct reports accountable? Because that's what came out of the Plant Moran report. And I think that's something that training that's not always going to fix. You just might have, there are cases where you have councils and there are these challenges. But how can residents be able to come in when they feel there are 4 votes that either protect a city manager or 4 votes that may protect a fellow council member? And so that's where I started thinking and looking at some of these different ethics boards as potentially a way to solve for that or provide an outlet for residents to be able to make a report. And as I was thinking of it, I was only thinking in light of ourselves as officials, holding ourselves accountable and potentially our direct reports, but not city staff. They have their own, I trust they have their own, they're held accountable and they have their own managers and systems. But I think as we also heard from City Attorney Bloom is that there isn't a lot of activity on these boards. And I think some of the questions I had was, is kind of looking at our neighboring communities, wanted to know what was the impetus behind why they were created. In Clawson, in Birmingham, Rochester, I would love to know more of those stories and how do they perceive, to what extent are they perceived as being effective? I did see in Birmingham from the information provided by City Attorney Bloom that just about every case that went forward was dismissed. And so that just made me question kind of its effectiveness in some way. And just wondering again about staff time and resources to create such a board. And another question I would have is just how do you ensure that that board is not used to malign someone or to be used as a weapon by someone who may have a grudge against someone else. So just some things that I'd be concerned about, as well as having the right talent. I saw that some cities have it embedded within the ordinance that is kind of, that allows and sets up this board, that it's no one who's ever run for office, someone, very, removed, but yet has the expertise and kind of knowledge around that. So just wondering, are there challenges to finding the talent to be able to serve, on that board? And then most importantly for me is resident input. To what extent did other communities like Clawson or Rochester have community input when they set this up, and how might you ensure, because that would be important to me, is to find a way through focus groups or whatnot to be able to have resident input on that, because it's all about residents. It's about them holding us accountable. So I want to know that that is something that we're hearing from them, and they would want to do that. So that's kind of where I am. I'm both very intrigued, but there's a lot I do not know, and a lot of those detailed questions I see that we've been asked. I would put back on City Attorney Bloom, who's more of an expert on some of those things. But I'm intrigued, but I also recognize that this would be a big process to move forward.
Thank you, Councilmember Chamberlain. Good starting point for this discussion point. Good points brought up. Councilmember Hamilton.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councilmember Chamberlain Karenga. I've been thinking about what you've been saying, and I would say, the thought was some of these boards of ethics are kind of, they aren't very active. But to me, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. If the boards aren't active, that could mean you have a council and a government that's acting ethically, and there aren't any violations coming up. So the question is its lack of activity mean it's not worthwhile, or does it mean it's serving as its purpose properly and as a deterrent from unethical behavior? And that's why you're suggesting to talk to these other communities, have focus groups, things like that is worth looking into. But if everyone's acting ethically, that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially if the cost of maintaining the board when it's not that active isn't much. It might still be worth it if it serves as a deterrent. Maybe there's some statistics on communities that have them versus those that don't. I don't know. Maybe MML has some insight into that. That's only my thoughts. I'm interested in this idea. I'm not 100% behind it, but it definitely seems to be some merit to it. So I'm open for it, but it's not something I would be ready to do right away. But that was just a thought on that point, that their lack of activity doesn't necessarily mean they aren't effective. But I'd like to look into it.
And Mayor, I'm sorry, I'm going to shut up after this, but I just wanted to point out one of the other documents that I did provide to council in the packet was the ICMA survey. And one of the questions was whether or not they had a board, and this is across the nation. And the percentage for having a separate board, ethics board, was fairly low. It was in the teens. So I just wanted to report that.
Thank you. Assistant City Manager Bruner, are you raising your hand or are you just saying hi?
No, I have a perspective to share on this. One is I worked in Birmingham for 3 years. I think the 3 years I was there, their board met once, and it wasn't for the purpose of a complaint. It was for the purpose of providing an advisory opinion. So I think based on a lot of the research and literature out there on ethics, that it's less important whether you have a board as part of your process. It's more important that you have a clear process for reporting issues. And that's something that if you go, we have talked a lot about the tone at the top over the last year and a half, and specifically the article that Plant Moran included at the end of their report. And that has a lot of good information about how you basically build ethics into your organization. But there's some fundamental things that you need to do, and that we have done, is that you have to have a code. You have to make sure that people have clear expectations, and they're held accountable to those expectations. And there's a process for doing that. Whether or not that process includes an ethics board or not is less important than just having those other pieces together. The other perspective that I'll share, because maybe because you're in it, it's not as clear to you, but the 7 of you ran for these offices in contested races, and thousands of voters voted for you. And that's not something that's undone lightly. And I think that's why the law kind of errs on the side of, you can't put together a board or put something in your charter that would let, 6 of you remove somebody from office for, whatever, some standards that we may all agree are unethical, but don't rise to that. And again, I think it's not as important. So for some people, the idea of censure or a reprimand seems unfulfilling. It doesn't have teeth, but it does. If that were to happen, it does send the message that ethical behavior is important to our organization. We won't allow it to go unchecked, even if it doesn't mean that somebody's going to be removed from office, because it's the voters who put you in those offices, and it's only the voters who can take you out of those offices, except for very limited circumstances. So that's just kind of something else that was going through my mind as I listened to the discussion tonight.
Thank you, Assistant Manager, City Manager Bruner. That's a good insight and additional thought-provoking points. Who else would like to speak on this discussion point? Mayor Pro Tem Brooks.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Assistant Manager Bruner. Those were actually some really good points. When I first looked at the ethics board, I thought this seems really great. But when you kind of dig into the details a little bit more, then you start to say, well, does it make sense? Who do they report to? And it kind of comes back to the process, I guess, is what Assistant Manager Bruner was saying. Like, who do they report to? What is the ethics board able to do? As far as, what are they able to impose any sort of consequences on those who violate those, the ethics? So it's just a lot of information, I think, that we need to still gather. And I think probably, just having a process is probably the most important thing. Understanding what happens when there is a violation of ethics, who does it get reported to, and who is responsible for kind of taking action and things like that. And really having a clear understanding of that, I think, is probably the most important thing. So I'm not opposed to the ethics board, but as you kind of dig into the details, I don't know. I could kind of go either way. So those are just kind of my.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Brooks. Very good. Councilmember Erickson Galt.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm wondering if it would make sense, since we're a little uncertain about ethics board per se, would it make sense perhaps to create an ordinance and then spend more time thinking about whether we want and need an ethics board, and to later perhaps amend the ordinance if we decide we want the ethics board? Because I'm getting the sense that I know I feel strongly about having an ethics ordinance. I agree with what Councilmember Abraham said earlier about perhaps doing this in steps. Let's think about immediately amending our existing code of ethics, which we can do fairly quickly, creating an ordinance, and then maybe at some later date, amending that ordinance to include an ethics board if we decide that's what we want to do. Because I think we can probably all agree on a lot of the essentials of an overall ethics ordinance without necessarily agreeing that we need a separate board. Just a thought.
Thank you. Great. I'm with you. Councilmember Abraham.
Thank you, Mayor. I too was really intrigued by an ethics board when I first started digging into the agenda packet. And the more I was reading, the more questions I had. And one of the questions that kept popping up in my head is, can this ethics board be weaponized? Can this ethics board get stacked by a council that may be unethical? Who does this ethics board report to? They're not elected officials that report to people. What is the do loop in terms, is there a do loop in terms of what recommendations they could make? Did they have to come to council anyway? What purpose do they serve if we don't clearly define what they are or are not empowered to do? And it gets me a little concerned. We did have a council that voted 4-3 to keep a city manager on board, and that there could have been a 4-3 vote to get people appointed to that ethics board, and the result might have been similar to what happened at the council table. So I'm trying to really discern how the ethics board could be structured in a way that could be independent of council, but at the same time accountable to our residents of Troy to act, to ensure that they're acting in a very nonpartisan, apolitical way, because I do fear that this great intention with an ethics board could very quickly go south. So I'm not sure I'm ready to commit to an ethics board at this point. I feel strongly about moving towards an ethics ordinance, and then, as Councilwoman Erickson Galt said, let's continue to talk about the ethics board and explore how it could be structured in a way that makes it achieve the purpose that we want it to achieve.
Thank you, Councilmember Abraham. Councilmember Hulrich?
What Edna said, that's where my head is. I do worry about unintended consequences. And we're doing the right thing, having these conversations and making sure we're really looking at responding to everything we've learned over a period of years and really learn from it and make the city better for it. I'm not positive that we need this to do that. Maybe we do, and we can keep exploring it. But on paper, at first, it sounds great. It sounds like this great solution. But living through what I did and thinking about even if this had been in place, I'm not sure this is what would have helped. And I think there's risk to it. So I support what everybody said, and worth exploring, but I'm not jumping on board and jumping up and down to want to do it right now. That's for sure.
Thank you, Ellen. I think what we are jumping up and down about is moving towards an ethics ordinance, but starting with the training and our code of conduct that we can do quicker. I think that's what you are seeing us jump up and down for, Lori. And there's pieces of what everyone said in this last discussion point that I completely agree with. From my experience on council and what we've gone through as a city, like Ellen just said, I don't think having an ethics board would have made a lick of difference for what was going on, based on how that ethics board likely would have been appointed, who would have likely been on it, or the type of person. I'm very, again, the idea of it, I think it looks like a great accomplishment. Look, we have an ethics board. Look what we're doing for ethics. But there's so many potential, I don't know if they're loopholes are the right word, but I really struggle with that concept. I don't think it means we shouldn't look to it as a future item like we've talked about, but I don't want that to be a hold up to the other things I think we do have more consensus on to move forward first. And I don't want to see you, Lori, being pushed with, well, okay, we need more information on ethics boards to hold up the process of the other things that we know we do want now. To Assistant City Manager Bruner's points, there was a recall of a mayor not that long ago. So it's in the city, it happens, and it's expensive and traumatic in its own way, no question, but there are methods in place. I'm not putting that energy out there, anybody, so don't get excited over there. But we did have an election in 2019 that I think a lot of the previous ethical issues were dealt with as part of that election as well. So I'm also, as concerned as I am about the ethical issues, the ethics issues in the city, I also am very comforted by the fact that some big things have happened in our city's process that show maybe we are in better shape than we feel like we are sometimes. My notes, I can't read my notes, but I just think that this is a great discussion point, but I don't know how we answer all these questions in a timely period that gets us to a point where I feel like we need to be on some other very important issues related to ethics first. So that's kind of my bottom line. And I think that's where most of you are at as well. And I think that's all I have for this discussion point without going into those points specifically. So should we move on to the next one, Lori?
Absolutely. And that actually, it talks about the code of ethics and or the rules of procedure. And so the training has been brought up. And I think another thing that also makes sense, and I think Councilwoman Erickson Galt talked about, how can we let people know, how to file complaints. And I think it certainly would be very appropriate to incorporate at least the two ad memos, the whistleblowers and the anti-discrimination ad memos, potentially incorporating them, certainly putting them in a prominent place. That might be an interim step. Obviously, the ethics ordinance would be covering that as well. But I don't know if council, I don't know if it's helpful for council to have these slides brought up where you can talk about what you have as your code of ethics, or if that's something that I'm also mindful of the fact that we've gone over 2 hours as well tonight. So I will defer to council as to how they want to handle whether or not there are any amendments to the Code of Ethics.
Thank you, Lori. I have a question about requiring training. Is that something that can be handled just in the Code of Ethics, or should be something that should be in the rules of procedure for council, or both, preliminarily, before we get to an ordinance?
It could certainly be in both. Again, rules of procedure can be waived. Code of conduct, that's a little more difficult to waive. So certainly you could put them in both.
Okay. Do we want to have a thorough discussion on the individual points? I mean, I think there's consensus that we like the points that are in there. I think in the Code of Conduct. I don't know, we talked a little bit about the de minimis gifts and such, and I don't know if that needs to be further defined or if that's something we want to approach right now. We've talked from the table before about how it can be kind of difficult to brainstorm and try to make the sausage of these worded things live, but I'm happy to try to facilitate something like that if there's something, one of the Code of Conduct rules that we think we need to discuss to amend potentially, or if there's something we think we should add other than a requirement for annual training at this point. Councilmember Erickson Galt, and then Edna, and then Rebecca.
Thank you, Mayor. I get the sense that we have a consensus on adding a training element, definitely for council, and perhaps for our other appointed officials. Would that be more appropriately placed in the Code of Conduct, which, as I understand it, applies only to council? Or would that go into the rules of procedure, or would there be another more appropriate location for adding the training element?
That's a good question. City Attorney Bloom?
Yeah, I think it could be in both the council rules of procedure and also the Code of Conduct. Again, depending on how it's worded, and certainly I think there is consensus to put that in. And then also, as far as the employee, I can't speak for Mr. Miller, but I'm sure he's nodding his head. I think that is certainly something that we can accomplish, and that can actually be added to eventually to the employee Code of Conduct in Chapter 4 of the ordinance.
Very good. Thank you. Additional comments or thoughts on that? Should we just briefly, I know we've been on for a while, but could we put up the slides or the 2 slides with those the Code of Conduct on there, just to make sure, so we don't leave tonight and feel like we forgot something?
And for IT, it will be you'll have to go back about 4 slides.
That's the end. Yep. It's interesting. To Councilmember Hoderick's point earlier, I don't want to beat a dead horse too much, but every time I read these, I read them a little bit differently, and they strike me, or they strike a chord differently. And so I think there is a lot of value in having, when we sign these each year, whatever they end up being, having them be in a part of the training or the agenda item or something, just so we really do soak them in. Because you sometimes forget, like, delegate authority for running of the city, the administrative staff. Well, to me, that's okay. That's our form of government, but that's also our council code of ethics. Like, what is that? If I'm calling and asking or suggesting things, am I violating that? Obviously there's gray areas and everything, but it's just really interesting to me to think about what those specifically mean, and how sometimes we forget. We remember the important things. Of course, we don't want to, take money from contractors, right, or vendors. That's the easy thing to remember. But am I truly encouraging the free expression of opinion by all council members? I mean, those are just important things, and I'm sorry, having a having a bit of a moment as I read these, thinking about the importance of some of them. But I think that again goes to Ellen's point earlier. We sign them, but are we really absorbing them? Should we switch to the other slide for a second? You know, as I read that top one, certainly we're not doing the amount of ribbon cuttings and celebratory grand openings and things that we normally do. I guess my one concern is plenty of times I've received, you know, a coffee mug and some Post-its and some pens, and obviously those are de minimis, but they're not food and beverage. So I don't know if that needs to be addressed. If perhaps it should be not just food and beverage, but also, you know, de minimis gifts of token appreciation or celebratory or something. I don't know if that's necessary, but if we are taking the opportunity, I think I probably have a mug from Waterford Bank or something right over here. City Manager Miller.
Well, to that point, I'll give an example that happened at the recent holiday season. A local credit union sent,
Yes.
I don't know why they chose this, they sent a package to the city manager, the mayor, and the treasurer. And in it was some candies, coffee, and sauces. So when something like that comes in, what I do is I like to make it available to the line staff that they could then take home. And when I indicated that to the mayor, he was happy that that's what I did. And that actually happens quite a bit during the holiday season. Not this one, but in previous ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I guess the reason I thought of that is here we're putting a big focus and emphasis on the importance of ethics in our city. I just, the clear language says de minimis food and beverage, but refuse any other gift. I mean, it's not a reward for an official action, so that's probably the wiggle room. But I hate to have somebody see me walking out of some grand opening with a bag that's not food and someone thinking, oh, and I could potentially be violating that. Just a thought. I don't know if that could be addressed or needs to be addressed, City Attorney Bloom. I'm assuming you drafted that language in the first place for this code, or?
It absolutely can be clarified, Mayor. I understand where you're coming from, and I think that without seeing a whole lot of council, anybody really in vehement opposition to that, it certainly could be tweaked.
Because I like those coffee mugs, and I just don't want to get in trouble. So. Councilmember Hoderick.
Looking at the ICMA Code of Ethics that were added into the code, for the newer council members, you know, part of the reason that they were added in there was we were trying to make overt, very direct indications that it's critical that our city manager uphold, as City Manager Miller discussed, that code of ethics of the ICMA. Whether it's City Manager Miller or the next city manager down the line, you know, that code of ethics really is very sound and captures, you know, an overall code for the city that we as council members need to absolutely be supporting him or her or whoever's in that role in meeting that code, right? We can't be bringing behaviors to our council table or our interactions with our city manager that lead the city manager on a path of perhaps at first a soft violation, which then can lead to the greater violations. So that's why the ICMA Code of Ethics is in here. And when you read through it, you know, that code, it as gray as some of these areas can be, it really helps clarify and helps you not get on that slippery slope. So, this is why I'm on the soapbox of talking about this very overtly, publicly as an agenda item, once a year as a council. Because quite frankly, it was city council that didn't have this in its lifeblood on a holistic way that would have really helped us serve the interest of our residents. Further, I think we had residents who didn't understand that this code was what we as a city, as taxpayers, residents, stakeholders, need our city manager to be working toward. So it's all of us then working together to understand. So this is why I'm so wanting to make sure that we have like a public reaffirmation, articulation once a year about this, because it helps all of us stay off that slippery slope, if you will, or recognize when we're getting on it. It is easy for public officials to get on one. It is very easy. And that's why these codes are so important. And I guess I need to refresh myself on it. You probably need to print it off and hang it up again in front of us, because it's so important. And I just wanted to comment, we talk about the training of our employees. Our employees, this is part of what they're thinking is on a daily basis as public servants. It's not in ours. We don't think about that. We don't report in every day with this in our lifeblood. So I'm really grateful. I continue to be grateful to the employees that were serving so ethically and trying to work so ethically, even through a time when we had a council that didn't, as a collective, fully recognize where it was falling short. And I just wanted to repeat that, because we need to have their backs. They need to have our backs. Our residents need to have our backs, so that our reputation as a city is always one of integrity going forward. That's part of what protects our AAA bond rating too, is being able to demonstrate that we are soundly managed. So that ICMA code was just really, our own code combined with that really hit me right between my eyes along the way of serving. And I wanted to share that with my new fellow council members, that revisiting that even more than once in a year offline is a good thing to do.
Thank you, Councilmember Hoderick. Appreciate that. Councilmember Abraham, did you have something? Okay, and then we'll go up to Councilmember Chamberlain-Green.
Thank you, Mayor. We talked about ribbon cuttings and maybe, very minimally valued gifts like keychains or mugs. But is there anything that we can do as a city to dissuade business owners when they're having these grand opening type of events to maybe not offer these up to either city employees or elected officials? And it sounds like I'm going overboard if it's just a mug, but I recall very early on in my tenure on council that there was a day spa that opened up. I don't even remember which one, but one of the things that they wanted to do was offer a certificate for a massage or some sort of spa service to all the council members. And I remember that one specifically because I recoiled from it, because in my day job, I would never be able to accept something like that. And frankly, all the suppliers in the automotive industry know better than to even put that offer out there. Now, I know that this is a different situation. Most people that are opening a business don't have deep pockets like an automotive supplier would, where they'd be offering gifts like that. But, if we're talking about us changing the culture as a council, I think we as a body need to make sure that we're actively discouraging those type of beyond de minimis gifts, because I don't want any offers like that, and I don't want to be put in a situation. And I think it's just better for everyone to have that understanding. And I don't know if there's some tactful way that we can do that so it doesn't embarrass someone who really doesn't have bad intentions at a grand opening.
I can speak to that personally. So a couple of thoughts on it. I've probably done more ribbon cuttings than anyone on the screen as of right now over the past few years. I think even before COVID. But so about a year ago, Massage Heights opened, and I did the ribbon cutting. It was when I was pretty new as mayor, and Cindy Stewart, our community affairs director, is very active in setting those up along with the chamber, and she does all the details for this on behalf of the city. And the owner did ask, or said he wanted to give massage gift cards to the mayor and anyone on council that came. And Cindy said, you know what, that's very generous, that'd be very kind, but they can't accept that, and they won't accept that. But if you'd like to, we can donate it to one of our nonprofits. I think Boys and Girls Club, knowing Cindy, or it might have been the Troy Community Coalition for one of their auction items. So we do have some of those fail safes in place when asked beforehand, right? And I've talked to City Attorney Bloom about this in the past. I can remember when Eddie V's, they sent gift cards to us in the mail. I think, maybe I'm making that, maybe just some of us, but I remember, I think it was Eddie V's, they sent a gift card, and and I asked City Attorney Bloom, quite frankly, it was a time when I thought it might have been a trap, or there might have been some more nefarious action just because of what was going on in the city. And again, City Attorney Bloom said, probably best to donate it to one of the nonprofits to use for their auction items or something like that. So that is incumbent upon all of us to make that affirmative step if we get faced with that situation. I personally refused things at times. I mean, when you're at a ribbon cutting, often new restaurants like to put out some food for you to try in non-COVID times. Because they're excited to share what they're bringing to your city, and they also know that we're very good spokespeople for them. If we enjoy the food they give us, usually we'll say so on social media or something. So I understand why they do it. And so there is kind of I hate to use the phrase, but quid pro quo in that respect. And I was talking to City Attorney Bloom a lot about this over the years. Her advisory opinion, if I can say, has always been, if it's in that grand opening celebration, and if it's something limited to when we're, having that at the time of the celebration or the party, it's probably okay. I always feel more comfortable drawing a line when it's not just a mug, but here's a gift card, come back, bring your wife, or let us know when you're here and we'll take care of you. Can't do those kind of things. So to your point, I don't know if we could and should try to wordsmith some of this to include language that is clearer on that, because I'm not so sure somebody who hasn't done as many of these, what they would do in that situation. Certainly, as we talk about it now, all of you are thinking, okay, well, I know that's what at least Ethan's doing, and that's what City Attorney Bloom said, so I'd probably follow the same rules. But in all fairness, it could be really difficult to turn down an excited new business owner who's trying to, sometimes it's cultural, they're trying to really thank you for being there, and they're generous hearts, and they're generous, and they're giving you something as a thank you on top of it. And that's a tough situation to be in. And again, I'll say that the businesses that do these kind of things, I really don't believe they're looking for anything in return. It's more of a gesture of gratitude, and maybe some hope for some future business. But City Attorney Bloom, do you have any thoughts on whether or not that could be written in, or how that could be written in, or how we go from there?
I do have some ideas, but I think Assistant City Manager Bruner has his hand up, I believe, and so he may have a better idea.
Well, in my defense, he's about this big on my screen. He needs to move his camera. There we go. That's much better. All right. Assistant City Manager Bruner.
Thanks. This is, so I've been working in the public sector 20 years now, and I agree, well-intentioned people want to do nice things. And so sometimes and we're not going to be able to, educate everybody in advance, but this is where having a specific gift policy or specific gift threshold may actually make our lives easier. Right now, both the way the the city council code of ethics is written and the employee code of conduct, there's not a specific gift threshold. Earlier tonight, I think somebody said something like $75. I don't think it's the $76 that proves corrupt intent. But if there is a situation where somebody says, hey, I want to give you this or give you that, to be able to say, oh, we have this code of ethics or this code of conduct. So, I appreciate the gesture, but I can't accept that. It's something that may make it a little easier to deal with those kind of situations, which is, I think, when people think of a limit on gifts, that's not what they're thinking of. They're thinking about like, well, what's the appropriate amount? But that can really be a way to kind of deal with that issue.
I mean, quite frankly, if someone were to give me a $75 gift card, that would blow my mind. Like, that seems like way too much for that kind of thing. I mean, I don't know. That's so strange. City Attorney Bloom, did you want to go ahead and follow up on that?
Just the $75 figure would be the amount of food, and so it would be inclusive of everything. And again, that's just it's a thrown out number, and certainly council can choose a different threshold if that's the direction the council wants to go.
And again, I don't think it's the threshold that's important. I agree. 75 might be high, 50 might be the right thing, but just to have a more specific policy that you can then use to, educate that business owner that we don't do that. This is our code and our rules, and appreciate the gesture, but this is how we've chosen to conduct ourselves.
Very good. Thank you. City Manager Miller?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and Council. I have a little twist on this situation, which I really actually would like to get some input back. Sometimes when restaurants are opening, they offer elected officials and staff the ability to go to a trial run dinner. And usually alcohol is not part of it, but they let you basically order whatever is on the menu. So some guidance on that type of situation would be good. And a dollar figure might be helpful too, because, most of the time, if we're using $75, one person's clearly not ordering $75 worth of food unless it's a super high-end steakhouse.
That's a good question. I mean, there's no question Bethany and I have been at a few different trial run restaurant openings in the city as invited guests. And yeah, I mean, most of them aren't too expensive, but like Eddie V's was, right? If you're ordering off their menu. So that is just be something that's addressed also. Ellen, did you unmute for a second, or did you have a comment?
I did. When it's explicitly about we're training staff, we're doing a practice run, we need bodies, we don't have enough family members to fill the restaurant, we're trying to help do a test run, and we're there for the ribbon cutting. I feel like that's us partnering with the business to help them get off the ground. When it has felt different than that, I haven't gone. I don't attend. And I don't know how you put a dollar amount on that, right? When we've been at ribbon cuttings and they might be a new business that's opening that has some food and beverage, I'll partake. But if they're giving away any gifts on the way out the door, I tend to walk out without one. And if it's handed to me, I might find a way of going and setting it back down so that I'm not in that awkward, no, I can't take this from you. And I just kind of find a way, because I come out of that private sector where we were really trained not to take anything, I've gotten to that point where that, as that bullet point is written, de minimis food and beverage, I'm able to navigate with that information. And I do kind of remember the day spa thing coming up, and I think Cindy helped us out by saying, council in the end, because you don't want to appear like you're not interested in the business and helping the business get off the ground. There's these professional courtesies that are going on, but for me, the language as it is has worked. I don't know how you put a dollar amount on it. Good luck with that.
Special shout out to Assistant City Manager Bob Bruner, who changed his camera, so now he's bigger in the screen. Thanks, Bob. Way to do it 2 hours and 40 minutes in. But I guess to Mark's question, and to Lori, I guess my question then comes down to, well, what is a reward, or what is an official action, right? If they're training their staff, are we there in our official capacity as an official, partaking in an official action? I mean, now I sound like both a sleazy lawyer and sleazy politician trying to do those things. But I mean, that seems like maybe why that might be okay versus something else. I mean, a ribbon cutting is probably an official action because I'm representing the city as the mayor, or we're there as council. Certainly, if it's getting a reward or a gift or a gratuity, so we approve a contract, that's a whole different thing. And as we've seen, and it needs to be addressed differently. Councilmember Erickson Galt.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't want to delve into, I read that section differently, and I think it's about punctuation. I think gift or gratuity is separate from reward for official action, but I, don't want to get into delivering an advisory opinion on the code of conduct. But what I think this is one of these instances where, going back to what Councilmember Hoderick said at the beginning of the meeting, is this should be more about training. I don't think we can write a provision like this to cover every situation. I think what we need training where we're going to be, where someone's going to say, okay, so you go to an opening and you're offered this, and you go to, so that you're put in those situations so you can think through it, because they're gray areas. I walked out of ribbon cutting with a little tchotchke that was it holds cords for charging. And I absolutely love it, but I've been fretting about it ever since, thinking, oh my gosh, that was a wrong thing to do. And I certainly haven't taken any action on council because they gave me that little, memento. But I just picked it up just as, oh, thank you so much, walking out the door, and think, I wasn't supposed to do that. And to me, that's the kind of thing that training can help with, to try, as Council Member Abraham has learned through her work. She's been trained as to just, politely turn down those sort of things. And to me, that's, you're never going to be able to write the code of conduct to address every one of these gray areas, but training can help you battle through it.
With examples, right? I mean, I think the examples are key, and I sometimes that's also what gets lost in these is, okay, I know what those words mean, but what does that mean for me in real life? I'm wondering why I don't have the cord charger, but that's a whole other issue.
Because you didn't pick it up.
If we share it, does that break the value down enough to where we're okay? No, sorry, we're clearly getting to the point where I think, so to Mark, to your question, to me, if we're invited because a restaurant's doing a grand opening and they're trying to train their staff, and it's a good way to get people, reputable people in the door to try to practice, and we go, I think to me, that's one thing. Whereas a restaurant that's already open calls you up and say, hey, Mark, or hey, Ethan, why don't you guys come down, dinner's on me Friday night. And to me, that's a whole different thing, right? I mean, those are the things that seems pretty clear to me in that respect. Maybe does everybody, Mark did ask for input on that. I mean, is that a fair thing, or do you think we should be moving away from any of those, staff trainings at restaurants and such? We heard from Ellen on the issue. She's the one that talked about training the staff. I think that's an important key. And you said also that you've stepped away when it doesn't feel that way, right? I mean, but again, that's a personal decision you're making. in a
I
gray
think
area.
part of it is from an economic development relationship building with these business owners and restaurants that open. I'm thinking a resident watching this is like, they're all out getting great free food. It is to someone opening a restaurant and really trying to launch it. They are just moved beyond belief when there are city officials, staff, or whatever that come to give them support, to cheer them on. We give a proclamation, we wish them well, we make sure they've been offered, however the city can be supporting you. That's like an official way of helping a business, one of our business partners in the city, get off the ground. It's not about quid pro quos between the city and the restaurant. They're not getting free fire inspection out of the deal. It's more to enforce that we're there for them. We want to be there for them and help them launch. And I think if a resident experienced and saw that, they would want us to continue to do that. It's actually an effort at the relationships that build community. If you and Mark get called to come for dinner and a good bottle of red wine on a Friday night, no, that doesn't qualify to me. How do you write that as a specific policy? To Anne's point, I don't know. I think we have to dialogue about it. And in between, if any of us does get, somebody reaches out to it and we need to talk it through before we accept it, Mark and Lori, Bob Bruner, they're there for us. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about it as a council and make sure that we are behaving as ethically as we think we should. That's kind of how I look at it.
Thank you. Any other comments on this topic or whether or not proposed changes to the council code of ethics, or that's where we started on this one? Councilmember Chamberlain-Pranga.
Hi, it's a little bit of a on this topic, but I didn't want to interrupt with the prior conversation. So I was reading through it and a potential addition came to mind, and would love your input on whether or not maybe it is already embodied there, and just kind of want to share where it came from just briefly. So I got in a rabbit hole as I was doing research this weekend. I was thinking about, what does it mean to be a fiduciary? We talk about that a lot, and we think about it often in an economic sense. But if you really read it, and my experience of knowing what a fiduciary is through nonprofit management, is there's a lot of ethics involved in that. And so I started doing some research, looking at what universities and people say about our fiduciary responsibility as elected officials. And it talks about, of course, duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty of accountability, duty to preserve the public's trust in government, but also talks about duty of impartiality, to represent all residents fairly, overcoming inherent bias. And so I just was wondering, to what extent does duty of impartiality exist within our code of ethics, which I'm very proud of. And is there something that represents that? And if not, is there a way, if there's consensus, to add something along those lines into it?
Great thought and discussion point. City Attorney Bloom, let's start with you.
Yeah, again, that is a duty of impartiality. There is one of the components is to treat all people fairly and with dignity and respect. And so that is certainly one of them. Obviously, the whole conflict situation, the whole reason why you can't have conflicts is so that you are treating everyone fairly, and that you're not granting any special favors or quid pro quo. But I'm absolutely happy to add any changes that council members want to see. And again, I do want to thank you all for the discussion. And again, to the point about it helps to have all of council talking about how they're going to apply these, because it helps to talk about where your values are. And again, I think that really is conveying to the public, to the employees, and to the council members how high ethics is on your list of priorities.
Mayor?
Yes, Mark. Thank you, Lori.
Part of my ethical obligations, especially being a planner, is that I represent everyone and try to be impartial. Part of what we're exploring, and I'm kind of putting Bob on the line here, so put your thinking cap on, Bob, is we are exploring citizen engagement and also equity and inclusion. And I think that could eventually feed into Code of Ethics a little bit. Bob, can you explain what we're going to present at Monday night to try to get to the bottom of this a little bit?
Are you talking about the proposal from GovHR?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. In addition to ethics, you know, to the highest priorities that we've talked about back in November are public engagement and equity inclusion, like Mark mentioned. We have been internally as staff trying to look around and see what other communities are doing, best practices, that sort of thing, and come up with a proposal to include in the next year's budget, and haven't made a lot of progress on that. So we reached out to James Vitrano, who you all know from GovHR. He's facilitated the city council personnel evaluations with the city manager and city attorney last year, and was involved in the city manager search back in whenever that occurred. It was a little before my time. And so James and another one of his colleagues from GovHR has provided us with a proposal where basically they will do the work, and it's 40 hours worth of work to kind of look at those two goals, look at what the city's currently doing, look at internally, externally to best practices, and then make some recommendations about what we can do as a city, so we could have a kind of a more specific conversation about how to proceed on those items that we discussed back in November.
Great. Wow, that's good news.
Mayor, I just want to really point out that from a professional standpoint, that in doing this is part of ethical obligations, and I think Bob's too, to try to put real terms into ethics and practice day to day. And it really is not that expensive. It's under $10,000.
Very good. Very good. So, Councilmember Hoderick?
Rebecca, you bring up a very important piece when you talked about that impartiality in it. There is, tell me if you think this one in the code is the same, and maybe you're hearing two different things, which is interesting. Render all decisions based on the available facts and independent judgment rather than succumbing to the influence of individuals or specific or special interest groups. I kind of remember when that was added, and that was during a time when council didn't seem like it was being impartial. So that language, if I'm remembering that right, Lori, I'm going back way back, but I remember a council way before me adding that in. Does that hit on the point you just brought up? I didn't want to lose that thought here with you.
Councilmember Chamberlain-Cragen?
Okay, I want no, thank you, Councilmember Hoderick. And if you look in the language, you can find, you can definitely find hints of that here and there. And I guess it was more of a how much do we want to bring that out, given that it is embedded within our fiduciary responsibility, and just so it's clearly seen. But I'm, don't want to rock the boat with our great code of ethics, and happy to keep it as is at this point in time. And maybe if we feel we need that down the road, it's always something we can do for sure.
Oh, I don't think it's rocking the boat. I think that's what we're here for. So don't don't back down now. I mean, I certainly hear what you're saying, and it could be. I'm not sure
residents would always see that in the way that we see some of the things. Sorry, Mayor.
No, absolutely. I mean, and it may be, Ellen, I'll call on you, but maybe including, I mean, that sounds silly, but including that word impartiality somewhere where it already could fit might actually serve the purpose you're trying to bring forward. Because you're right, a resident may read that and not necessarily have the historical context that Ellen's talking about, and may read it one way, and maybe they think, well, aren't they supposed to be impartial? Like, why doesn't it just say that? We get yelled at a lot for that kind of stuff. Councilmember Hoderick, did you want to add something again?
The fact that she didn't pick that up from that bullet point tells me that that bullet point isn't serving us any longer in the way that I think it did initially when it was put in there. So, because Rebecca reads between the lines, I know she does. So the fact that she didn't, I would support either adding the word into that bullet point or, reinforcing it with that specific phrase. Because that is so critical to our responsibilities. So I appreciate you calling that out.
Is there consensus to see if Lori can wordsmith some of that to include something to make that a little more obvious? I don't want to see a nodding head. I think, Lori, do you think you could work with something like that to try to improve upon it and to bring Rebecca's points to, sorry, I'm on a first name basis at 3 hours in, to get to where that might be a little more, I don't know, plain spoken in a sense, right? I think that's what sometimes is needed.
And yeah, I think absolutely adding the word impartiality may be a fix for it. So certainly happy to propose some new language.
Great. Thank you. Any other proposed changes or thoughts to the Code of Ethics, Council Code of Ethics at this point? Recognizing that it sounds like Lori's going to provide us with some updated language to review in the near future. And I guess I'll just throw out, I don't know, maybe because this is so important to us, is it possible to include, once it's finalized, include a copy of it in the agenda each week or each meeting? A lot of residents do read those. I don't think it's a bad idea for the residents to see, again, our focus and our attention to that issue. Just a thought. Otherwise, it gets put in our file or the city clerk has it and, it's kind of set. It's on the website, of course, but sometimes it's nice to have it right. Frankly, if I had it right in front of me right now, it might help as soon as I'm going through it with this agenda packet. The more it's in front of us, that I was trying to think, we blow it up in a big picture and put it in city council chambers, but then if we make any changes, that seems like a waste. So maybe that's a little bit too far, but okay. City Attorney Bloom, I think you have your understanding of that. I think the last point on your slide was any further input. Councilmember Hamilton.
I know it's getting late, so I'll be brief, but I've mentioned this before, but I'd just like council and city staff to just think of what provisions. I keep thinking about the charter because I just like the idea of it because it's more permanent. So what issues, if any, we should add to the charter, what's in the charter regarding this that needs to be tweaked or removed. I don't have any answers. The answer may be nothing. I don't know, but it's just, to me, it's a critical piece of this. I just like the idea of, at the very least, having something permanently in place that will last beyond this council. I know we can't put everything in there. I know we can't put anything super complicated in there, but to me, I really think it could have a good long-term effect if we do it right. So I don't have any answers right now, but I just want it to be something we think about. And it's not a short-term thing. It's going to be something, any election, upcoming election, it could be put on there. It could be next year. It could be, we don't know, but it's just something I keep thinking about. And I've thought about through this whole process. Just, I just want to, I want that to be part of the conversation. So.
Thank you. I think it was summer of 2019, sitting in the boardroom, we talked about other potential charter amendment issues that needed to be addressed or potentially addressed. A lot has changed since then, and priorities shift. But there are some other outstanding things on there as well. I know. I'm sure it's in a file somewhere for you, City Attorney Bloom, is with all the other ordinance changes and such things that need to be made. But we might need to talk about that. And the Charter Revision Committee as well. But as it specifically relates to ethics, David, I'll think about it. I didn't speak about that earlier when I was talking. I'm all for an ordinance. I'm hesitant on the Charter Amendment 1 because I don't know what that would be at this point, but I'll definitely give it some good thought. I understand the appeal of that. I don't want to say permanence because it could be removed at the next vote, but but that
it adds more more steps have to be taken. And Councilmember Hoderick, I remember when she talked about the charter amendment that was on the ballot 3 years ago, how you always want to be really, really careful when you change the charter because of those extra steps. It's something you don't want to do lightly. So I do want to be very cautious here, but at the same time, I do think there's an opportunity here for long-term change.
The mayor shall not accept free coffee mugs at ribbon cuttings.
Perfect.
I'm a no on that one, Dave. I'm a no. All right. Any further input that we need to give our city attorney? I think she's probably been given more than she expected in one sense. But I guess maybe I'll ask you, City Attorney Bloom, do you want to encapsulate what you learned from us tonight, or what you think your marching orders are or direction is? Does that help you or hurt you, or do you want to follow up in email maybe? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I just want to make sure you have a pretty clear understanding of what we've gone tonight.
Yeah, first step is to make some proposed language revisions to the Council Code of Ethics, and that is a priority, and we'd like to get that done as quickly as possible. There are just a couple of tweaks that we would be looking into. One of them is to make it very clear that council should not act with any partiality. And another one is to address the de minimis and the restaurants and the gifts. So to bring some language to council on that. Another thing that I will do as well is ICMA code has been amended and updated as well. So obviously we have to update that in addition. Also to add some language about the requirement to actually have a training session in either the Council Code of Ethics and or the Rules of Procedure, and then eventually to do an ordinance that talks about that's an ethics ordinance for council members and appointed officials, and then to make a couple of tweaks to the employee code of conduct to make sure that training is a requirement there.
Sounds good. All right.
And then to think about the charter amendment later if council gives that direction.
Very good. Very good. Anything else from anybody tonight on this issue? I think we've done a very, very good job. I do say so myself. I've been a Councilmember Erickson Galt.
I just want to say how grateful I am to be serving on a council where everybody prioritizes ethics and have our top staff and appointed officials to be very concerned about ethics as well. We all know our history in this city, and to have this 180-degree turnaround where we're focusing on ethics and fretting about what our ethics should be as opposed to just brushing it aside is such a refreshing change. And I just wanted to thank all of you for doing that.
Thanks, Ann. You know, I knew long before you were on council, I knew you as somebody fighting for transparency and ethical conduct, and that's how I was first introduced to you in this realm. So we'll leave it at that. But I appreciate those comments, and it's true. We absolutely are. I think it's refreshing that we're able to work together constructively on this and have these conversations, and especially publicly. And public conversations about ethics can be full of scary moments for people, but it's important that we feel safe enough to ask the questions and to get the advice from our council and to really think about what we're doing. I want to take this quick opportunity to again talk about what a great decision it was to appoint Mark Miller as our city manager, who's had a very firm focus on ethics all along, and for Mark to bring in Bob, who I've learned does ethics trainings himself. I mean, we're obviously very focused from a city management standpoint on ethics and the importance of that. And coming from where we were, I think that's so important. And to City Attorney Bloom, who is faced with probably the hardest task in representing the city through all of this and representing each of us in certain ways and trying to balance all that. I appreciate you very much for all that you're doing and look forward to seeing what you're able to provide to us and as we move forward in this process, because I think there's always pressing priorities in the city. We obviously are facing COVID-19 and the pandemic and all that's related to those issues. Doesn't mean we can't focus on the important city business that we have to do also, like this ethics policy as well. So thank you. I appreciate that very much, Lori, and Mark and Bob. Thank you for all the information you provided tonight and your willingness to work with us, not against us. I think that's very important. And finally, as a reminder to everybody, we've got a joint meeting 2 nights from tonight, Wednesday, February 3rd at 6 p.m. with the Downtown Development Authority. Chairman Alan Kerwick and I will be co-chairing that meeting. We look forward to talking about many important things as far as the DDA's budget moving forward, where they stand with taxable values and valuation issues that could be facing them as we come out in and out of the pandemic, and how we work with some of the funding that's been released based on our good bond stewardship. So that's Wednesday, 6 p.m. We'll be here in the same place. Thank you to our healthcare heroes, first and frontline responders. We appreciate you all very much, and good night, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you and good night.